That's Mark Dolan tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry, Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 12 o'clock on Friday, the 27th of September. I'm Tom Harwood.
And I'm Emily Carver.
Britain's youngest killers. In the last few moments, two knife murderers who were just 12 years old when they killed a 19-year-old with a machete have been sentenced to life, with a minimum term of just 8 years and 6 months. They could be free from prison, aged just 21.
And when Keir met Donald, the Prime Minister and former President shared an intimate 2-hour dinner last night atop Trump Tower. Not too long ago, Starmer bashed Boris Johnson's close relationship with Trump. Is he now trying to emulate it?
Creative accounting. The government has complained of a £22 billion black hole for months. Yet today we learn Chancellor Rachel Reeves may change the rules to borrow £50 billion more. How does that add up?
And as we mentioned, the sentencing of those two, just 12 years old, when they brutally murdered a 19-year-old man. We're going to go live to Nottingham Crown Court, where the sentencing has taken place. And our reporter, Will Hollis, is there for us. Will, please bring us up to date.
Yes, well, this is the second day of a 2-day sentencing hearing. Yesterday we heard impact statements from the families, but today Mrs. Justice Tipples has just a few moments ago handed down her sentencing to those two 13-year-old boys who were just 12 years old when they became the UK's youngest knife murderers. They killed Sean Ceasahai in a park in Wolverhampton. The judge has just handed down a sentence for a minimum term of 8.5 years. That's the same for both of those boys, who, as we know, cannot be named for legal reasons around their age. Mrs. Justice Tipples, in speaking to the boys, said, "You both killed Sean. You are different individuals with different backgrounds, but I am sure you intended to kill him. Sean did not deserve to die, and you will live with the consequences for the rest of your life." So at the age of 13, for both of those boys, 8.5 years will take them up to their early 20s, about 21 years. To give you a comparison, the killers of James Bulger, John Venables and Robert Thompson were sentenced to an indefinite sentence, and they were let out after 8 years after parole in 2001. Just a reminder for the horrific details of the case. In November 2023, Sean Ceasahai, a 19-year-old from Anguilla in the Caribbean who had came to the UK as a student but also for an eye operation, was in a park in Wolverhampton when he had a confrontation with those two boys. One of the boys, who said that he regularly carried the machete knife, openly admitting last year in June during the trial that he regularly carried that knife. The two boys set upon him with the 42-centimetre machete, killing him. Ultimately, the wound that was fatal was a stab wound through the heart, but also a wound to the head took away a piece of Sean's skull. One of the boys took the machete home and cleaned it with bleach and that's where we are now. So that is an 8-year and 6-month sentence for those 2 boys who were found who were convicted for the murder of Sean Sisahai from Anguilla in Caribbean.
I mean, a lot of people will be listening to that 8-year and 6 months sentence and think, goodness me, that is a woefully short sentence given the age of these individuals. As you say, they will be out in their early 20s, either 21 or 22 years of age. How is that justice?
Yes, well, the sentencing guidelines for life are different for children as they are for adults, adults being anybody over the age of 18. And in remarking yesterday on those sentencing guidelines, murder will always have a sentence of life imprisonment. But yesterday it was discussed that for children under the age of 14, it is 13 years minimum that they should spend in prison. But the judge remarked that mitigating factors can bring that down, or it can raise that. 13 years is just a starting point, and that is where the judge has found that those mitigating factors have led her to sentence the boys to 8.5 years. If it was a person over the age of 18, it of course would be many more years that those people guilty of a similar or the same sort of crime of murder would have been sentenced to.
OK, and Will, I understand there was a media application put into the judge to name the 2 13-year-olds convicted of this crime, convicted of this murder, but it was rejected on the grounds that the welfare of the boys outweighed the wider public interest.
Yes, well, we've seen it happen in the past that children who are under the age of 18 but are found guilty of the most heinous crimes have their anonymity removed, particularly around issues of public interest or open justice. That's what a selection of the media that had been covering the trial here at Nottingham Crown Court had submitted to the judge, that there was a case for open justice, for public interest, because of the age of the boys, who at the time were 12 but are now aged 13 and guilty of becoming the UK's youngest knife murderers, that if the general public knew who these people were, then maybe the public would be safer, or maybe we could have a better understanding of knife crime issues. But Mrs. Justice Tipples ultimately ruled that the welfare of those 2 young boys was more important than the public interest, particularly because of the background, one of the boys having experiences with social services for all of his life, for the difficulties that have surrounded their upbringing, and that is ultimately where she found that ruling not to reveal the identity of the boys, which the anonymity is enshrined in law in the Criminal Justice Act, meaning that anybody under the age of 18 going into legal proceedings has the right to anonymity, meaning the media, although we know who these people are, cannot report who they are.
Now, Will, we're looking at a picture of the victim on our screens now, Mr. Sisahai, who came from the Caribbean. Now, the Caribbean has a far higher murder rate than the United Kingdom. You'd expect that if someone were to come from the Caribbean to the United Kingdom, they'd be safer. What a cruel irony that his visit to the United Kingdom ended in his death. This is a shocking case, and as you say, Will, this is Britain's youngest set of murderers since James Bulger.
Yes, well, John Venables and Robert Thompson killed James Bulger after luring him from a shopping centre, torturing him and killing him, leaving his body on a train track. That was in 1993, and they were aged 11, so not much of a difference in age, just a year from the age of these 2 boys, age 13 now, but age 12 at the time that they killed Sean Sisahai with a machete. Sean's family did come over for the trial, and And they said yesterday in victim impact statements that were read out on their behalf by the UK's representative to Anguilla, that they have faced not just mental health problems, academic problems, the loss of a family member, but also the effect of having to spend lots and lots of money for repatriating the body of Sean Sisahai, thousands and thousands of pounds to bring his body back to Anguilla, but also to come here and to witness the justice that the judge would hope had been served today.
Will, I'm sorry, I'm just going to interrupt you because Mrs. Justice
to...
Tipples is now reading out that sentence. Let's listen in.
And as a young man aged 19, his whole future was ahead of him. On the 13th of November last year, he was murdered by the two defendants who acted together and killed him with a machete in a park in Wolverhampton. The defendants are children who were aged 12 in November last year and were still aged 12 when they were convicted by a jury at Nottingham Crown Court in June. They are now aged 13. The first defendant pleaded guilty before trial to the possession of the machete in a public place, and the second defendant was convicted of this separate offence by the jury. Today, I have to sentence the defendants for the murder of Sean Sisahai. I also have to sentence them for the possession of a knife in a public place, although that offence adds nothing to the offence of murder in this case. Murder is the most serious criminal offence, and the sentence is fixed by law. There is only one sentence I can give the defendants in this case, and because of their age, it is called detention during His Majesty's pleasure. This is a custodial sentence, which means that the defendants will remain in the secure accommodation where they've each been living since they were arrested. I'm required to determine the shortest length of time each defendant must stay in custody before they can be considered for release by the parole board. This is called the minimum term. It is then for the parole board to decide when a defendant can leave custody, and their decision depends on a defendant's behaviour in custody and whether it's safe for that person to leave custody. The law requires all judges sentencing children or young people, however serious the offence, to have regard to the principal aim of the youth justice system, which is to prevent the offending by children and young people, and the welfare of the child or young person. The Court of Appeal has made it clear that sentencing children and young people requires an entirely different approach than that which the courts routinely apply to adult offenders. One aspect of that is that in communicating sentences to children in a case like this, the court can break the sentencing remarks down into stages. That is what I have done in this case. The first stage is for the judge to inform the child of the sentence and tell them the reason for that sentence in brief and simplified language which they can easily understand. The second stage is for the judge to provide sentencing remarks so that everyone can understand the judge's reasons and be sure that all relevant legal and factual considerations have been taken into account. These remarks are that second stage of the process. I dealt with the first stage earlier this morning. The facts of this case are horrific and shocking and can be explained very shortly. The first defendant bought a machete from a friend in October last year for £40. He kept it under his bed. On the 13th of November, he came home from school, got changed out of his school uniform into a tracksuit, picked up the knife, left home and met up with the second defendant, a friend from school. They then met up with other friends, and by early evening they headed to Stowlawn Field, where they were soon after 8 p.m. Sean Cisahay was visiting Wolverhampton with a friend, and earlier in the evening they were sitting on a bench in Stowlawn Field chatting about their plans for Christmas. About 8:15 p.m, Sean and his friend left the bench and walked away from it past the defendants. The defendants were then at the bench. Sean returned after a few minutes, spoke to the defendants and asked them to move. Moments later, he was dead. The defendants jointly attacked Sean and killed him. The defendants immediately left the field together, the first defendant picking up the machete, which he returned home with, cleaned it with bleach and put it back under his bed. The defendants were arrested the next day. Sean was killed by a stab wound to his back caused by a machete, which almost went through his entire body, was 23 centimetres deep, and penetrated his lungs and heart. There were also injuries to Sean's head, arm and thigh. The cut to the head was caused with such force it went through Sean's scalp and into his skull, resulting in a bone flap. I'm sure from the nature of these injuries that the defendants intended to kill Sean. They acted together to do so, although I cannot be sure which one inflicted the fatal stab wound. It was an attack which happened on the spur of the moment and was not premeditated. I have explained that the only sentence I can pass on the defendants is detention during His Majesty's pleasure, and I have to set the minimum term that the defendants must serve in custody before they are considered for release. I must set the minimum term by reference to Schedule 21 of the Sentencing Code, as Parliament has enacted. This case falls within paragraphs 5A and 4 of the Code, which means that, as the defendants were 14 or under at the date of the offence, the starting point is 13 years. The starting point reflects the seriousness of the offence. I then have to approach the task of setting the minimum term by looking carefully at each defendant on an individual basis, both in terms of what they did, together with the information I have about them as people, their backgrounds and experiences. I am required to undertake this exercise by reference to the Sentencing Council guidelines, sentencing children and young people. This guideline identifies in detail the very many important considerations and factors that I am required to take into account. I also have to look at the list of aggravating and mitigating factors set out in Schedule 21. There is some aggravation because this was an attack by two people, but the relevant mitigating factors are the lack of premeditation and the age of the defendants, all of which I have taken into account. The barristers in this case have also assisted me with their written sentencing notes provided in advance of the hearing, together with their oral submissions at yesterday's court hearing. I now turn to each defendant. The first defendant was much closer to 12 in age than 13 at the date of these offences. The pre-sentence report for the first defendant has been prepared by the two social workers who were allocated to work with him from when he was remanded in youth detention accommodation in November 2023. The report is dated July 2024 and has been prepared in accordance with the National Standards for Youth Justice Services and relevant guidance. It is a detailed and comprehensive report in which the social workers have collated information in relation to the first defendant from all relevant sources, both in terms of documents and speaking to the relevant people, including the first defendant. I have read all of this report with care and taken all that it says into account. Part of the report deals with the assessment of the first defendant, including consideration of safety and welfare issues. This section in the report details the extensive involvement of children's services in the first defendant's life and the reasons for that. The report also explains, amongst other things, that the first defendant has been referred to mental health services and there have been instances of self-harm. He was diagnosed with ADHD in 2022. It is in this context and against this factual background that the report says this, and I quote, "Having spoken with the first defendant and consulted records held about him, we would assess that the first defendant seems to function at a lower level than his chronological age, both in terms of understanding and his emotional literacy. The first defendant is a child with extremely complex needs. He has experienced violence from within the home from an early age. It is clear he has experienced change, loss, and unpredictability, which must have an ongoing impact on his sense of identity and belonging. His experience of such developmental trauma is highly likely to have had a negative impact on his cognitive development, his ability to regulate his emotions in the moment, and to take informed decisions. He was made even more vulnerable through his ADHD diagnosis." The report then continues by saying that there is a professional consensus of opinion that the first defendant was being groomed and exploited, and that, in the professional's view, his experiences in this respect contributed indirectly towards his participation in Sean's murder. Another part of the report assesses the risk to the community, including the likelihood of reoffending and risk of serious harm to others. This explains that at the time of the offences, there were significant concerns about, amongst other things, the first defendant's access to knives, exploitation, and how easily he was influenced, which meant that the likelihood of offending and serious harm were very high. The authors of the report note that this has to be seen in the context of the first defendant's very many adverse childhood experiences. He is now in a safe place where people will help him, and he has undertaken meaningful work which is helping him to make positive changes to his thoughts and behaviours. They are hopeful that his secure placement will result in further reducing his risks in the future. The report also explains that the first defendant has spoken about what he did, that he said it is not fair that someone lost their life, and he feels sad about it. He said he feels bad that he took the knife out with him, and he wished things had gone differently. There is also a pre-sentence report dated the 11th of September of this year, which updates the court. The first defendant continues to do well at the secure unit, and the conclusions set out in the original report remain the same. I have also been provided with and have read the report of a consultant clinical psychologist in relation to the first defendant. That report also explains that the first defendant is particularly vulnerable and immature, identifies further diagnosed disorders beyond ADHD, and explains that his verbal reasoning abilities are equivalent to those of a 10-year-old. The report also recalls the considerable progress the first defendant has made, where he is now living. Finally, I have a letter from the National Counter-Trafficking Centre dated July 2024, which explains that the first defendant was a victim of child criminal exploitation, and it is accepted he is a victim of modern slavery. The starting point of 13 years needs to be adjusted downwards because the first defendant's chronological age was that he'd relatively recently turned 12 at the date of the offence. I then have to take into account that at the time of the offence, his emotional maturity and developmental age were less than that. He has been adversely affected by multiple traumas throughout his childhood, for which he is and cannot be responsible. These are all factors which diminish the culpability of the first defendant. The first defendant always accepted he bought the knife and took it to the field, and he's shown some insight into the harm he has caused. But I agree with the authors of the pre-sentence report that he does not at this stage have the maturity to fully appreciate the consequences of his actions. On top of that, he's making progress with his behaviour and education in the stable and settled environment where he is living, and that should continue to progress. The first defendant did not have any previous convictions, but he was known to the police and had been carrying knives. But that has to be considered in the context that he was the victim of trafficking and extremely vulnerable. I have taken into account everything I know about the first defendant and what he did, and in my judgment, the minimum time he should spend in custody is 8 years, 6 months. From that must be deducted the 315 days that he's already spent in custody. The first defendant will remain on licence for the rest of his life. This means that there are conditions that will be decided when the parole board decide it's appropriate for him to leave custody, and he will have to follow those conditions for the rest of his life, and if he does not do so, then he may have to go back to custody. I now turn to the second defendant. The second defendant was much closer to 12 in age than 13 at the date of these offences. The pre-sentence report for the second defendant has been prepared by the 2 social workers who were allocated to work with him from when he was remanded in a secure unit in November last year. It is dated July 2024 and is a detailed and comprehensive report, which has also gathered information about the second defendant from all relevant sources, both in terms of documents and speaking to the relevant people, including the second defendant. I have read all this report with care and taken all that it says into account. The report explains in detail the second defendant's background and upbringing, the upheaval caused to his childhood by moves in the location of his family's home, some of which was spent in a refuge, and the disruption this caused to his childhood. The second defendant has a supportive and loving relationship with his parents and his brother. He was not known to social services or the police at the time of the offences. The report explains that the second defendant expressed that he feels remorse for what happened, and he feels sorry for Sean's family and understands that they are suffering greatly having lost their son. It is possible that the second defendant has dyslexia, but that's not yet been confirmed. In terms of risk, at the date of the report, the second defendant was assessed as a medium risk of reoffending and a high risk of serious harm to others. The report then says that it's important that he continues to engage with the support and interventions where he's living, as that will give him something positive for his long-term future. The authors of the report accept the serious nature of the offences and what the second defendant has done, but comment very positively on his behaviour since he's been on remand, his motivation to do well and to achieve qualifications. The report also makes clear that whilst he is physically mature for his age, he is still young, and it will take time for him to mature emotionally and developmentally in an environment where he feels safe. I have an updated pre-sentence report dated the 5th of September, which confirms the conclusions in the earlier report. This further report also provides more information as to how well he is doing where he is living, and that he continues to behave in a positive and mature manner. He is on graduate level and has received recently an award to commend him for what he has achieved where he is living. The starting point of 13 years needs to be adjusted downwards because the second defendant's chronological age was that he'd relatively recently turned 12 at the date of the offence. His emotional maturity and development age was not below his chronological age. He does not have any mental health problems but may have dyslexia. I then have to take into account that he's now showing maturity beyond his years. He is responding very well in custody. He was of good character and has shown remorse for what has happened. I have taken into account everything I know about the second defendant and what he did, and in my judgment, the minimum time he should spend in custody is 8 years, 6 months. From that must be deducted the 315 days that he has already spent in custody. I appreciate that this is the very same as for the first defendant, but having applied the guideline, the factors that have led me there are different. But when I have considered and balanced the individual features of each defendant, that is the clear conclusion that I have reached for each of them. The second defendant will also remain on licence for the rest of his life. This means that there will be conditions decided when he leaves custody, which he will have to follow for the rest of his life. If he breaks those conditions, then he may have to return to custody. I order no separate penalty for the first defendant on count 2, possession of a bladed article in a public place. I order no separate penalty for the second defendant on count 2. I order forfeiture and destruction of the machete. I make no order for costs and no order for compensation. The victim surcharge applies. Finally, I would like to extend the court's condolences to Sean Cesarhay's family and to thank them for the dignified way in which they have conducted themselves during this trial. I'd also like to thank the police, all counsel, the intermediaries and all the court staff involved. That concludes these sentencing remarks.
We have been listening to Mrs. Justice Tipples announce the sentence of those two now 13-year-old boys, sentenced to life with a minimum term of 8 years and 6 months. Of course, they murdered Sean Cesarhay, aged just 12.
Yes, indeed. Now, the pair are the youngest convicted murderers in the UK since J.B. Bolger's killers, Robert Thompson and John Venables, back in 1993. We will now be getting a little bit of the background to this hideous crime that we've just seen the sentencing for.
I was outside in the living room and her phone rang and she answered the call and she started to cry. I asked her what happened. She said Sean got stabbed.
Sean Cesarhay was just 19 years old when he was stabbed to death in a Wolverhampton park. Originally from Anguilla in the Caribbean, Sean had only been in the UK for 6 months, having come to receive treatment for cataracts. It's the 13th of November last year, and the 19-year-old boards a tram with his friends from Handsworth to a stop in Wolverhampton. An hour after leaving his home, he's seen here in a petrol station shop before making his way with one of his friends to the Stow Lawn playing fields. This CCTV is blurry, but police believe this footage at 8:14 p.m. is the moment Sean was attacked by two 12-year-old boys. Mr. Sisahai was shoulder-barged by the smaller of the two defendants. When he questioned what they were doing, one of the boys pulled a machete from his trousers and Sean shouted "run" to his friend. But as he tried to escape, the 19-year-old tripped and fell. The trial heard during the murder the machete went through his body, all the way from his back, through his ribs and into his heart. Detective Inspector Damien Forrest, a senior investigating officer at West Midlands Police, describes the impact of the attack.
I've been a police officer for 20 years. This isn't the first time I've been out to a young man who's lost his life in a really violent way. But to then find out that two 12-year-olds was responsible was shocking. You only have to stop and think for a minute how you would feel to be 1 minute having a laugh with your friend, going about your business, the next minute running for your life before turning around and realising that your best mate's life is over. And I think there's a very real effect of that will change our witness's life forever.
In this photo taken the day of the attack, one of the 12-year-olds can be seen posing with a bladed weapon. The trial heard that one of the defendants often carried a machete with a 42.5cm long blade. Giving evidence to jurors, the boys blamed each other for inflicting the fatal blow and showed no remorse for what they had done in the 24 hours before their arrest, with one cleaning the machete with bleach and hiding it under his bed. Sean's mother, Manishwari, says before his death, he was excited about his future.
He wants his own house, he wants his own car. You know, Mommy, I want to shine in my life. I can't see my son married, don't have a wife, no grandchildren from him. It's very hard. Sean, you must remember, we always will remember you until God ready for us. One day we will see each other, right? I love you, Sean.
Jack Carson, GB News.
Just a shocking, shocking story. Will Hollis has been following this story, of course, for us. He's the voice you heard on that package and joins us now outside the court. Will, many people will suggest that 8.5 years is all too short a sentence.
Yes, well, what we were just hearing a moment ago before we saw the package, which included CCTV footage of some of Sean's last moments, was Mrs. Justice Tipples delivering what would have been her sentencing remarks if it were an adult, for the adult ears and for the adult audience of that courtroom. But a little bit beforehand, we saw a simplified version that was delivered for the two children, 13 years old, who were found guilty in June of killing Sean Sisahai while at the age of 12, and that made them the youngest knife murderers in the UK, the youngest killers in 30 years since the killers of James Bulger, John Thompson and John Venables and Robert Thompson. Pardon me. And what the judge was saying ultimately was the mitigating factors that have led her to deliver the sentence of 8.5 years. That is dramatically different to what an adult would be given for the life sentence of murder. And let's just remind you of some of the things that she said. She said when thinking about the boys that you are different individuals with different backgrounds, but then some of those mitigating factors that she brought in while discussing the first defendant, she said that she described how he had been groomed and exploited, and that adverse childhood experience had affected his upbringing, and that because of these factors it reduced the culpability. She also spoke about how the second defendant had had some difficulties, how he possibly has dyslexia, but had ultimately a happy family life with good family relationships, how he wasn't known to the police. She was describing Mrs. Justice Tipples that this was not a premeditated attack, that it was spur of the moment. So it will be those factors that she would have used to mitigate the sentence, which for children under the age of 14 starts with a mandatory sentence starting point of 13 years, but can be reduced depending on those mitigating factors, and we heard yesterday from both of the defence lawyers that because the boys are having positive results while in youth detention facilities, that they should, as they submitted to the court yesterday, should have those sentences reduced, and maybe that's why the judge has sentenced to 8.5 years today for those two boys, which of course cannot be named for legal reasons.
Thank you very much indeed, Will Hollis, for being there outside Nottingham Crown Court for us. Very interesting, Tom. We heard a lot about the first defendant, a little less about the second defendant. Completely different lives, completely different backgrounds, completely different experiences. It does sound like the first defendant had an awful upbringing up to this point.
Yes.
Went through a huge amount. Obviously talk about ADHD and self-harm, but also trafficking, very difficult relations, abuse, witnessing violence throughout his childhood. Second defendant sounded as though, apart from maybe a bit of dyslexia, he had a pretty reasonable, normal family life, loved by his family, loved by his brother, etc. Why then did they have the same level of mitigating factors? It sounds like they have completely different stories to tell. Also, we still don't know who actually did the stabbing.
No, and that, I suppose, is part of the ambiguity there. But to me, the point of prison is to make society safe, to keep bad, dangerous, violent people away from law-abiding people. That's the separation. That's the service prison provides. So I don't care. I don't care if some murderer has had developmental trauma. I don't care if they're messed up inside. That shouldn't be a mitigating... The only question for how long someone should be in prison for is, are they a danger to society?
I mean, Tom, the judge clearly believes in second chances, and a lot of people would argue that the prison system and the criminal justice system should be about rehabilitation, particularly for 12 years, people who commit crimes at 12 years old, however heinous. So surely there is a case for giving children a second chance if they do prove that they can...
If someone has had developmental challenges that mean they haven't developed the right parts of their brain to know compassion or to control anger... That, to me, is a reason to keep someone in prison for longer if they've murdered someone, not shorter.
Not to sound like a bleeding heart liberal, but perhaps he could learn those things. Perhaps, given appropriate care, he could become a better person. However, as we know from reoffending rates, it's not always the case, is it?
I think
and they do get to keep their anonymity. Do you think that's right? Do you think that's right? James Bulger's killers didn't get to.
So many different issues here. Anonymity. The judge didn't wear a wig or a red robe because that would be seen as intimidating. It was held in the smallest courtroom in Nottingham because a larger courtroom with more people would have been intimidating for the murderers. Seems like an awful lot of thought has gone into making sure the murderers feel very comfortable.
Yes, and I'm sure the family of the victim are absolutely devastated. Anyway, we're going to turn our attention to politics. We will get to some of your views on that sentencing because you have a lot to say. But overnight, the Prime Minister held his first meeting with former President Trump in a bid to build relations with the Republican nominee before, of course, the upcoming US election.
Well, Keir Starmer shared a 2-hour dinner in New York with President Trump, who praised the Prime Minister as popular, saying he's very nice and ran a great race.
Such a way with words does Donald Trump have. Very nice.
The reading age of a 2-year-old.
Very nice, very nice. We're now joined by the editor of Spite, Tom Slater, to talk a little bit about this. It all sounds rather cosy. We do know in the past Keir Starmer hasn't been forthcoming with praise on Donald Trump, but I guess he has to get on with it now.
No, absolutely. And the idea of the two of them having a 2-hour dinner in Trump Tower, you know, if only you could fly on the wall. One of them a deeply unpopular, divisive politician mired in sleaze scandals, and the other one being Donald Trump. But it's a fascinating kind of combination of characters because, as you say, not only is Keir Starmer a much more kind of technocratic person, certainly less of that common touch, arguably. There's also the fact that he has had a long record, as have many other Labour frontbenchers, of dissing Donald Trump, effectively. Keir Starmer's previously said that Trump lacks a sense of humanity and dignity. He's questioned what planet he was on at various points, referred to his political tactics as divisive and undemocratic. And also joining them at that dinner was David Lammy, who most famously has referred to Trump previously as a woman-hating, neo-Nazi, sympathising sociopath. So I think what we're kind of being reminded here is that the Labour Party have engaged in a bit of kind of I suppose, student politics where international figures have been concerned previously, where they can just sound off without having to think about the diplomatic consequences, and then now having to wind that back in very quickly.
It's fascinating because it wasn't that long ago that Keir Starmer was ridiculing Boris Johnson for his relationship with Donald Trump. I mean, it is interesting. This is the most remarkable about face that suddenly, now that they're in government, all of these Labour politicians have a very, very different line to take on the man who could be the next US president.
No, absolutely. And of course, on the one hand, we shouldn't have politicians who are concerned about raising disagreements with world leaders just because someone's president of the United States and so on. But obviously, there is a way in which the game is played. And I think in recent years, we've had particularly politicians from the Labour Party think that they can just sound off to their own base rather than take those issues into concerns. It's just something a bit unserious about it as much as anything. I think it also kind of speaks to the fact that a lot of this rhetoric, I think even they knew deep down that this wasn't the kind of character that they were dealing with. But I don't think David Lammy genuinely thought last night that he was meeting a neo-Nazi sympathising sociopath. But it's been the nature of our politics in recent years that politicians, even though would present themselves as from the kind of sensible, moderate, centrist wing of politics, have been engaged in a kind of anti-populist hysteria, which they're now having to wind back in very quickly.
Yeah, there's been a whole lot of hyperbole, I must say, from all sides. But yes, David Lammy is a particular offender, isn't he? I wonder what you make of this as well that we've heard from the US trip. Keir Starmer making a little joke about the whole Lord Ali row over the penthouse at this Wall Street investor meeting, this summit, saying, I'd like to pretend this is my apartment to welcome you to, ha, 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 referring to the UK Council General's residence in New York. It's interesting, isn't it? Is it a laughing matter?
Well, I think if Keir Starmer was a more gifted joke deliverer, maybe he would have gotten away with it. But I think it just adds to the sense that the Labour Party aren't listening. And also, I think almost at this point, the issue is less the hypocrisy. It's more the sense of entitlement that has crept in. It's almost like, how dare you challenge us? We're not, you've got to remember, we're not the Tories. We're not those horrible people. We're the good people. And therefore, whatever freebies and, bonuses that come with the job, we deserve them, whereas those other lot don't. And I think that's the thing that now that we've seen with this joke, with the various interviews that he's given, he doesn't seem to get why people are upset. And I dare say jokes like this will add to that sense.
Yeah, so stark as well, given that he completely ignored the issue in his conference speech only a couple of days ago, didn't mention it at all, to the surprise of some people, and now he's joking about it with a lot of bankers in New York City. Well, there we go. Tom Slater, editor of Spiked, really appreciate your time, as always. Good to see you.
Yes, he probably thought it would go down well with the US business chiefs, the bunch of bankers. It would all go down very nicely. Ha, 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 ha.
Yeah, strange that he didn't sort of reference it or try and sort of move past it in his speech, sort of, because it's the vacuum that has allowed this story to grow and grow and grow. It does seem that the Number 10 operation perhaps hasn't quite found its feet yet.
Yeah, and it is embarrassing for Keir Starmer to have the likes of Harriet Harman going on the media and saying essentially that Keir Starmer should find a way of paying for these things himself. That's got to be awkward. I mean, that's got to be embarrassing. Anyway, this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. We've got lots more coming up on today's show. Now, the government has been complaining for so long now about this £22 billion black hole. Yet today we learned that the Chancellor may actually manage to change the rules, do a bit of creative accounting to allow her to borrow £50 billion more. Go figure. How does that add up?
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Let's have a look at this story in the Telegraph, Charlie. And this is about Anglican Church, the Church of England, dropping the word church in favour of something a bit more modern sounding. Words such as community. Why are we afraid of the word church?
Well, that's my question. I mean, you've got to assume that they think it solves some kind of problem. But I think, there are a lot of people who feel very strongly about their particular religious institution, whatever they all have different names, don't they? And if you rename one, do you have to rename all of them? Can we no longer use an individual name for different religions' community buildings?
Are you religious?
I'm spiritual.
You sound like him. Yeah.
No, certainly.
Oh, don't get any started on me.
Do I believe in a God? Yes. Do I believe in any of the particular gods that are offered to us? Still undecided.
I'm like you. I said exactly that.
You two are the same. You two are exactly.
What about you, Anna? Are you particularly religious?
Well, I'm not proper religious. I won't name myself as a religious, but I really do respect religions. And we have bigger problems to think about.
Is it a sign of where we're at in this secular society?
Yes.
We're moving more and more towards that. The Anglican Church feels that the only way to be relevant is to take away any reference to church going, to being religious.
I think if the substance of what you're offering is good, it doesn't matter what it's called. You know, so if people are going to find solace and peace and a place that makes them feel better, they're not going to care too much about what it's called. So I think relabeling it, rebranding it, I don't know, maybe it'll help, maybe it won't, but it's going to certainly upset a lot of people, I should think.
And people whose religion is important to them and kind of central to their lives, you can imagine.
Absolutely.
There's a reason Justin Welby is nicknamed by some quarters the Archbishop of Woke. Maybe this adds fuel to the fire, who knows?
GB News, the People's Channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 10 to 1. Now the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, is reportedly hoping to free up as much as £50 billion to invest in big-scale projects, finding this extra borrowing from changing the rules. This comes after months of complaining about a £22 billion black hole.
Yeah, so how on earth does this add up? OK, let's speak to Head of Lifestyle Economics at the Institute of Economic Affairs, Christopher Snowden. Christopher, thank you very much indeed. Now, the government have been banging on about this £22 billion financial black hole that they inherited from the Conservatives. Now, through some kind of creative accounting, it seems, we may have another £50 billion to spend. What's going on?
It depends on what you do with the various bits of the books. You can move things around. You can say that this is an exception from the rules that Jeremy Hunt introduced. I mean, these rules are arbitrary. They can be changed. All that really matters is that you don't have a run on the pound and a big scare in the bond markets, which is what happened with the mini budget of Liz Truss, famously. But governments can keep borrowing lots and lots of money. The Bank of England potentially can keep printing lots of money. I don't think it's planning to at the moment. But, these rules were set by Jeremy Hunt because if you're going to borrow lots of money, you need to at least pretend that you're going to pay it back at some point, or at least reduce how much you're borrowing. The reality is we've been borrowing £120 billion last 3 years for no obvious reason. I think Reeves can probably argue that she would like to borrow more for investment. It might be the GB energy, it might be some of the net zero stuff. And she can say, well, that's different, it's investment. I think the point is we should only be borrowing for investment. We shouldn't be borrowing for day-to-day spending, which is what we've been doing at an incredible scale for many years now.
So really what matters here is that the bond markets believe that the debt is good, that it will be paid back. But the curious thing is that is, to some extent, more about messaging than it is about the actual numbers or the policy. It's all based on vibes, to some extent. Liz Truss, whose tax freezes and cuts totalled £45 billion, well, last time I checked, £45 billion is a smaller number than £50 billion that now reportedly Rachel Reeves will be borrowing. But Rachel Reeves can add £50 billion to the debt each year, so long as she sounds sensible about doing it.
Yeah, and in particular, so long as the OBR says that this is affordable in the long term. One of the big mistakes of the Tory premiership is they ignored the the OBR. They kind of tried to sideline the Treasury and the Bank of England. And so the messaging that came out was really negative. And people were basically betting against Britain. People thought that some lunatics have taken over. We don't know what's going to happen. So it's very much about messaging. The actual amounts that were involved in the mini budget, even if the estimates have been correct and they turned out to be huge overestimates, were not that enormous. It's just the way they went about it, and the message was, we're going to keep on cutting taxes and we're going to keep on borrowing to pay for these tax cuts. That's what spooked the markets. It was very largely about messaging.
Well, we'll see. We'll see what happens, whether she is able to find this 50 billion and continue to borrow to invest. Thank you very much indeed, Christopher Snowdon from the Institute of Economic Affairs. Thank you for your time. Yes.
There are risks of this, of course, though, because it's not just about will there be a run on the pound or will there be confidence collapsing. I mean, if you borrow more, the cost of your debt can start to rise. And that can keep interest rates higher for longer.
Yeah, indeed. We could have interest rates higher for longer if we borrow too much, but there you go, 50 billion, that's all right. Liz Truss tax rises, not all right. Bad vibes, bad vibes.
It's all vibes-based politics, there we go.
Anyway, we're going to be back outside Nottingham Crown Court as Britain's youngest knife murderers are handed life sentences, but with a minimum term of just 8.5 years. That next.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Time for your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. After some very heavy rain in the south this week, it looks a lot drier for most places out there today. Pretty chilly in a brisk breeze with some sunny spells and a few showers. This low pressure brought all the heavy rain yesterday and last night, still across the far southeast this morning, but it's pulling away and allowing the winds to come down from the north. Quite a brisk wind blowing along these North Sea coasts, bringing a real chill and a few scattered showers. Showers across northern Scotland, one or two dotted around elsewhere, particularly in West Wales. But for most, it'll be dry and bright with some spells of sunshine, certainly a lot drier than it has been across the Midlands. It is pretty chilly, though. Temperatures struggling, only 14, 15 at the very best, and parts of the north struggling to get into double figures. Feeling colder when you add that wind on, which will be particularly lively along the east coast and across parts of northeast Scotland, where it continues to blow the showers in here, and temperatures will drop away fairly sharply this evening too. Showers will keep going across Northern Ireland, and some will feed down through the Irish Sea into North Wales and along the west coast of Wales. But for much of England and Wales, it'll be a dry evening, leading to a dry night and a clear night. And with those clear skies and as the winds start to ease, it is going to turn pretty cold overnight. Some pockets of frost are possible, certainly across northern England and southern Scotland. Northern Scotland won't be as cold as last night because here more cloud will arrive, bringing some outbreaks of rain. But elsewhere, well down into single digits. The countryside, as I said, likely to be pretty close to freezing. So a chilly start to Saturday for sure, but quite a fine start for the bulk of England and Wales, dry and sunny. Quite a lot of cloud for Scotland. There'll be some showery rain drifting through the central belt. We'll keep some showers going through the day across western and northern Scotland. Not much getting to eastern Scotland. And so we'll continue with sunny spells over parts of the Midlands, East Anglia and the southeast. The wind's not as strong tomorrow, but again, it will be on the chilly side.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
There's an incredible £36,000 to be won in the Great British Giveaway. That's like having an extra £3,000 each month to play with. And because it's totally tax-free, you get to keep every penny and spend it however you like. We could be paying for your entire year until 2025. How amazing would that be? For another chance to win £36,000 in tax-free cash, text CASH to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or text BONUS to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries cost £2. Or post your name and number to GB08, PO Box 8690, Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 25th of October. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
Michael Sheen talks about how he was wearing false teeth and wigs and whatever else to play this part. How's it gone down over that side of the pond?
I mean, I have to tell you, I absolutely loved it. I'm seeing everybody else there. They think it's a hoot, but Ben and Anne, it is very funny. And you walk away from it thinking that was great television. But is that appropriate when you think about the fact that it's associated with Jeffrey Epstein? You know, after it was over, I thought, I'm going to say good things about this. But the further I get away from it, the more I think, but what about these women that were violated by Jeffrey Epstein when they turned on the television? Were they laughing? Did they see the humor in it? Or are they horrified that it's become a joke?
The dialogue seemed very stilted and expositional, I thought. But then you think, well, that's clearly what they were trying to achieve. And it wasn't a documentary, it was a drama. And some bits were clearly made up.
Absolutely. I mean, when you watch the princesses crying, when you watch the princesses making decisions behind the scenes, it's very compelling television. And you have to remind yourself, similar to The Crown, that you are watching something based on a true story, but has been greatly exaggerated for entertainment value. And I initially thought, oh, this is horrible for Prince Andrew. And it is. But at the same time, I think that sometimes these pieces make the royal family a little bit more relevant. They introduce new people, and people are now watching them a little more closely. And I think it's a double-edged sword. It can be both things. It can be bad. It can be good for the royal family.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 1 o'clock on Friday, the 27th of September. I'm Emily Carper.
And I'm Tom Harwood.
Britain's youngest knife murderers have been sentenced. A pair of now 13-year-old boys have been sentenced to life with a minimum of 8.5 years in prison for the brutal murder of 19-year-old Sean Sahai in 2023. We'll bring you the latest from Nottingham Crown Court.
And when Keir met Donald. Yes, the Prime Minister and former President shared an intimate 2-hour dinner last night atop Trump Tower. Not too long ago, Starmer bashed Boris Johnson's close relationship with Trump. Is he now trying to emulate it?
And creative counting, the government has complained of a £22 billion black hole for months, haven't they? Yet today we learn Chancellor Rachel Reeves may change the rules to borrow £50 billion more. How does that add up?
And in the next hour, Benjamin Netanyahu will address the UN General Assembly. The Israeli Prime Minister has frustrated US officials this week by sending mixed messages over accepting a US-led proposal for a 21-day ceasefire. We're going to have the very latest on this escalating situation.
Lots of you have been getting in touch about this sentencing of these two child killers, just 12 years old when they killed a man with a machete, a 19-year-old man in a park in Wolverhampton. Lots of you complaining about how liberal the judge was, in your view. Just a minimum of 8 years, 6 months. They could be out by the time they're 20, 21, 22, around that time.
And also some question marks here over how the judge was referencing one of the murderer's dyslexia as a mitigating circumstance. As if not being able to read as quickly as anyone else is a reason you should have a mitigation for murder. Bag Lady says, I'm sure that's not her first name, so we have to fear dyslexics and those diagnosed with ADHD in case they're carrying knives. Well, apparently that's the implication.
Well, also, the second defendant, the one who she said may have dyslexia, she also said about him that he is physically mature for his age. He has a maturity beyond his years. He's of good character. He's shown remorse. So I'm not really sure why dyslexia is particularly relevant. The first defendant clearly had an awful upbringing. I think that's pretty clear from what we've heard from the judge there. Particularly vulnerable, victim of modern slavery, very young for his age, developmentally. But it's very interesting with these completely different backgrounds that they should have the same sentence.
And yet Terry raises a very good point. Boy number one, the one with all of these challenges, with all this developmental trauma, he was known by the police to be a knife carrier. Never arrested, never charged. Terry says questions need to be asked there. Could this have been prevented?
Yeah, and Stuart worries they'll just get hardened in custody and they won't be rehabilitated. Well, that is a question. We know how bad reoffending is. But please do keep your views coming in. gbnews.com/your say. But let's get the headlines with Tatiana.
Emily, thank you very much. The top stories this hour, as you've been hearing, Britain's youngest knife murderers, who were aged just 12 when they killed Sean Cissahey with a machete, have both been sentenced to life with a minimum term of 8.5 years. The killers were convicted in June of murdering the 19-year-old, who was stabbed in the heart and suffered a fractured skull in November last year in Wolverhampton. Now, they are the youngest convicted murderers in the UK since Jamie Bulger's killers Robert Thompson and John Venables back in 1993. Let's listen to what Chief Superintendent of West Midlands Police Kim Maddell had to say.
His family are understandably heartbroken and mourning their beloved son, and our thoughts and sympathies will remain with them. Today's sentence can never make up for Sean's life being taken, but we hope it can bring some comfort to all those who loved him. Sean was only 19 when his life was taken at the hands of two boys, then aged just 12, who had armed themselves with a machete. That reality has had a huge impact on us all.
Barristers representing alleged victims of Mohammed Al-Fayed say there are now 60 survivors and they have credible evidence of abuse at Fulham Football Club. The former Harrods and Fulham FC owners accused of multiple sexual assaults after a BBC investigation published last week. A spokesman for Justice for Harrods survivors, a group of barristers representing the alleged victims, says there's been an enormous response to the investigation. Their statement also said there are more alleged victims to come. Sir Keir Starmer's called for Israel and terror group Hezbollah to agree to a ceasefire, saying escalation serves no one. Speaking at the United Nations General Assembly, the Prime Minister implored the two sides to step back from the brink. Sir Keir also discussed the importance of a ceasefire deal with his Lebanese counterpart. It concludes Sir Keir Starmer's three-day trip to New York after attending the annual meeting of world leaders. It comes after the Israeli Prime Minister said his nation's troops would keep fighting at full force and that news of a potential ceasefire deal was not true.
Further escalation serves no one. It offers nothing but more suffering for innocent people on all sides and the prospect of a wider war that no one can control.
Benjamin Netanyahu has since said negotiations on a ceasefire in Lebanon will continue despite his insistence that the IDF maintains its offensive against Hezbollah. Netanyahu's statement added that Israel shares the aims of the US-led initiative of enabling people along the northern border to return safely and securely to their homes. Netanyahu is preparing to address the United Nations today. An Israeli airstrike, meanwhile, early this morning reportedly killed 9 people from the same family in the southern Lebanese border town of Sheba, including 4 children. Meanwhile, Israeli air defences say they intercepted multiple rockets over the northern city of Haifa this morning. Defence Secretary John Healey says it's a good sign that Netanyahu's attending the UN General Assembly.
It's good that the Prime Minister from Israel is in the United Nations today. He will hear about the calls from many countries, led by the United States and Britain, for an immediate ceasefire in Lebanon, 21 days in which the fighting should stop on both sides. That gives everyone a chance to concentrate on the peace plan that is on the table, that the Israelis themselves say would allow them to get their citizens back into northern Israel and the Lebanese to return to their homes in southern Lebanon. That's what we should all be working for.
In other news, the first adult in England to be charged with riot following widespread disorder last month has been jailed for 4 years and 4 months. 32-year-old Kieran Usher of Sunderland pleaded guilty after being filmed working with a group of at least 20 people to, quote, rain missiles onto attending police officers in the city. That coming from the Crown Prosecution Service today. Hundreds of people were involved in a night of violence on the 2nd of August, during which police officers were repeatedly attacked A building was set ablaze and businesses looted. Russell Findlay has been elected as the new leader of the Scottish Conservatives. The MSP saw off competition from Murdo Fraser and Megan Gallagher in the battle to replace Douglas Ross. The announcement comes ahead of the UK Conservative Party revealing Rishi Sunak's successor on November the 2nd.
I want to start by thanking everyone who put their faith in me and thank obviously to every single member who voted for me and every every supporter who worked so hard for my campaign. And thank you, of course, to my fellow candidates, Megan and Murdo, who I greatly respect and value, along with the rest of my MSP colleagues. Now, everyone must come together as one united team. Let's start the hard work right now to win back public trust.
And finally, more than 180 flood warnings and alerts are in place across England after days of heavy rain, forcing the closure of a motorway as drivers abandoned their cars. Images posted on social media also showed tracks at a station in Shropshire completely submerged. The Met Office says northern and central parts of England and Wales had been hit the hardest. And now a weather warning for strong winds has been issued for Sunday, which may cause disruption across the southwest of England and Wales. And those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Tatiana Sanchez. More from me in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Good afternoon, Britain. It is now 10 minutes past 1. Now, as we've heard, two 13-year-old boys have been sentenced to life with a minimum term of 8 years and 6 months after being found guilty of the murder of 19-year-old Sean Sisahai in Wolverhampton last year.
Well, the pair are the youngest convicted murderers in the United Kingdom since Jamie Bulger's killers, Robert Thompson and John Venables, back in 1993. Let's cross to Will Hollis, outside Nottingham Crown Court, where the sentencing took place. Will, this was a pretty profound moment and a brutal murder.
Yes, well, sentencing concluded just a few moments ago here at Nottingham Crown Court, but the murder of Sean Sisahai took place on the other side of the Midlands, in the West Midlands, in Wolverhampton, where in a park in November 2023, Sean was killed by those two very young boys who were only aged 12 at the time, and the killing made them the UK's youngest knife murderers and the UK's youngest killers since Robert Thompson and John Venables, the case that is so memorable in British memory 30 years ago, the killing of James Bulger. This killing will stand out as well in British history because these two young boys, as I say, are the youngest knife murderers, particularly at a time when knife crime is so prevalent, particularly in the West Midlands, which is now the UK's capital for knife crime. We heard on the steps of the court just shortly after sentencing, the West Midlands knife crime lead, Kim Maddell, for West Midlands Police, saying that knife crime is never acceptable. The shocking part of this is, of course, the age of those two young boys who today, in handing down that sentence for 8.5 years for both boys, Mrs. Justice Tipples explained some of the mitigating factors. Those are the factors that would are the reasons essentially for why why an offender would be given a certain sentence. And there are two defendants in this, of course, two boys, and Mrs. Justice Tipples highlighted that they are different boys with different backgrounds. One of them, the defendant, she said, had been groomed and exploited, how he had been a victim of child criminal exploitation, and that these factors reduced culpability. She described how the second defendant, another boy, had some good family upbringings, had a close relationship with his mother, with his brother, and was not known to police. Differences from the first boy, who was known to social services and was known to police. And because of some of those mitigating mitigating factors, the boys today have been sentenced to 8.5 years in prison.
Crown Court for us to bring us that. There is that question that's coming up, and it's coming up in the inbox as well. What about the parents? As a parent, you have responsibility for a child, don't you? Or if you're a guardian, you have a responsibility for that child too. Should there not be some kind of punishment or something for the parents who've allowed their child in some ways to, well, become that kind of person who would commit such a crime?
You'd think at the very least some monitoring.
Well, perhaps. I mean, let us know what you think. Do you think that the parents deserve to be convicted for being negligent, perhaps, for not knowing, for bringing up a child to commit such an act?
Although then you get into the nature and nurture debate. Could it be that there's just something fundamentally, genetically wrong in the head with someone who decides to kill someone?
Well, there we go. It's a debate, isn't it? We're going to move on because David Lammy, Keir Starmer and Donald Trump walk into a bar. Sounds like the start of a joke, but it happened last night as the Prime Minister tries to build a relationship with the ex-president and Republican nominee.
Well, the trio had a 2-hour-long dinner in New York before the Prime Minister and Foreign Secretary flew back to the United Kingdom. Keir Starmer said it was good that he got the opportunity to meet the Republican nominee, and Trump returned the compliment, saying he thought Starmer was very nice and ran a great race.
Gosh. Very vague. We're joined by Catherine Forster, our political correspondent. This 2-hour dinner, I wonder what was on the menu.
Oh, to have been a fly on the wall in that meeting. Hey, yes, 2 hours in Trump Tower. David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary and the Prime Minister, now Sir Keir Starmer himself has been very critical of Donald Trump in the past. He accused him previously of peddling the politics of hate and division, and David Lammy went even further, previously said that Trump was a neo-Nazi sociopath, a racist KKK and Nazi sympathiser. But how times have changed because, of course, they find themselves in office, and the very real possibility that Donald Trump may be elected president again on November the 5th. And come January 20th, he could well be president. So clearly they have to change their tune because we do have a very, very important relationship with the United States. They are our biggest and most powerful ally by a very long way. So whatever differences there clearly are and have been, they will be working very, very hard now to brush those all under the carpet. Worth saying that Labour have been working hard for months to build relationships with the Republican Party. Karen Pierce, the US ambassador, has been working to build relationships on both sides. But this is significant because it is the first actual meeting. Sir Keir Starmer rang Donald Trump after that first assassination attempt. But hearing the language, Sir Keir Starmer saying how important it was to meet face to face, and Donald Trump on his absolute best behaviour last night, wasn't he? Telling our very own Chris Hope that he had to be nice, but that he thought the Prime Minister was a nice guy and had done really well to get a big majority and was very popular. But clearly he hasn't seen the Prime Minister's popularity ratings lately because they have been falling through the floor.
Yes, very interesting and very good of our colleague Chris to be right there at the front, getting that question in. Quite a conversation with the former president, backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards. Of course, he also mentioned Nigel Farage, saying that Nigel should have won many more seats. It seems that Donald Trump is an opponent of the first past the post electoral system, a line I didn't think I'd be saying today.
Yes, indeed. It was quite curious, wasn't it? Of course, the Reform Party won millions of votes and only ended up with 5 seats. They got more votes than the Lib Dems, who ended up with 72. So the first past the post system, the way it works, is certainly curious. But it was very strange what Donald Trump said, because he did at one point say that he'd won. I mean, it was almost like he'd implied that there was an even bigger sort of miscarriage of justice on this side of the Atlantic. But of course, we know that he is very firm friends with Nigel Farage. They've been friends for a long time. We had that famous picture, didn't we, a couple of years ago about the two of them grinning in the gold lift in Trump Towers. But I think Number 10 will be delighted that they have met Trump. They won't care that they haven't met Kamala Harris as much. They would have liked to have met her, but she's in Washington talking with Zelensky. But they're less concerned about their relations with the Democrats because that's the sister party. They have more in common. They've already met President Biden on several occasions.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Catherine Forster, our political correspondent there, live from Westminster. It's funny to hear from Donald Trump such an innocuous, harmless, sort of inoffensive comment when it came to Keir Starmer. Nice.
It's
good.
It reminds me of the old phrase in American politics: "Only Nixon can go to China." Sort of, if a Democrat had gone to China to meet the communists, everyone would be like, "You communist sympathiser," whereas Nixon was so ardently anti-communist, he could go and that would all be OK. In the same way, maybe only Keir Starmer can meet Trump. If a Tory had gone to meet Trump, all of the pages would be, "Oh, you Trump sympathiser," "Oh, whereas it's a bit only Nixon can go to China.
Do you think? Do you think? Maybe. Anyway, the Keir Starmer freebie row continues to rumble on, but it could be getting quite serious, actually, for the Prime Minister.
Yes, an article published by the Guido Fawkes website is now alleging that the Prime Minister may have, potentially, broken electoral law with his use of Lord Arley's Soho penthouse.
Yes, this new allegation comes as the Prime Minister is under increasing pressure with the row that will not go away. I mean, Labour grandee Harriet Harman has weighed in. She says the Prime Minister should find a way of paying for his own football tickets, which has got to be a bit embarrassing. Bit embarrassing for Keir Starmer.
It would be wise for him to actually find a way of paying, as Ruth says, for the tickets himself in other sorts of hospitality there, but not necessarily the director's box. I don't know enough about the insides of a football stadium to know whether that's feasible, or not go. But I don't want this to be the next row when the football regulation is going to be really, really important for our national game.
I mean, it's clear that Keir Starmer doesn't believe he's done anything wrong, apart from perhaps the clothes, which he said he won't take anymore. He won't take donations for clothes. But everything else he seems to think is fair play.
Well, this is interesting. Let's talk with the barrister and writer Stephen Barrett, because, Stephen, this Guido Fawkes article is suggesting that it matters where you are living at the moment at which you sign your nomination papers. They cite a previous case to do with Paul Nuttall, a previous UKIP leader who got into some hot water here. Do you think there's a case to answer here?
Now, that is quite an old rule, Tom, and I think what I should do is distinguish between sort of old rules and new rules, because what's happened since this government came into office is that there are alleged rule breaching across the board on appointment of people to jobs, on declaring expenses, and on other issues. This older rule goes back to the tradition that we will know where our politicians live, that they are somehow connected to the land. That's very deeply important to us. When we got rid of the corruption that we had in our political process in the 17th and 18th centuries, we invented a system of not very many rules, but rules that we enforced quite strictly. And this is one of them. And if this has been breached, then that is quite a serious thing. It looks as though in the proceeding, in the case where somebody was sort of chased over this, if you use the address you used as a base during the campaign, then you can escape sanction. But the reason to distinguish between old rules and new rules, Tom, is because I think we've got far too many new rules, and nobody really knows what they all are. That's what happens when you create too many rules. If you just keep printing new laws and making new offences, then actually you'll just accidentally criminalise a whole bunch of people. Are we having a sophisticated relationship with rules, because we removed an MP in 2019 over £700 misdeclared expenses. Now, are we going to remove a Prime Minister over misdeclaring expenses if expenses have been misdeclared? What we need to have, Tom, I think, is a system of consistent rules which are fairly applied to everybody. So you shouldn't really, if you care about anything, don't really care about Mr. Sakia, because we've had 4 prime ministers in 4 years. He doesn't really matter. What matters is our country and the system that we live in. And what we need to have is a system of rules that everybody knows in advance that we then apply consistently. And I think if this does develop into a major scandal, and it's looking that way, then really the benefit to the country is not scalping a PM. It will be working towards a system of consistent rules that we all know.
I'm sure that's true, but for Keir Starmer and his image and his popularity and the respect people have for him, he's always been a stickler for the rules. He's spoken about how his justification for all of these freebies, I mean, he seems to think there's absolutely nothing to worry about as long as you declare it as you should, as long as you write it in the right place, as long as you put the right amount and everything's correct and things. But is that really the point for the general public?
Well, I suspect that is what the public feel, because this will be the very definition of hoist by your own petard. I mean, they have made a massive fuss over this for years and years and years. I mean, just to tell you, and I've sort of sat here wondering, and I've always had to say, well, what you think about an offence being committed is your personal political opinion, and that is true. But I think it perhaps is time that I say that maybe we've been a bit ridiculous over rules that really don't matter. There was an organisation that went around and hounded any right-wing think tank or organisation over its cookies policy, and kept trying and threatening litigation over lines in their cookies policy. Now, that is just, I mean, look, OK, it is a personal political opinion, but that is ridiculous. And we can't, it's not actually healthy to live in a society that's full of a bunch of rules that nobody knows, and then all of a sudden you've committed an offence. Most people are decent, good people. They don't want to commit offences. That's why if you want to, I actually think this links to mental health. I think it causes a lot of anxiety to live in a system where there's no rules. Let me take Ofcom. They claim to have an impartiality rule. They clearly don't, because it's not being applied in any way consistently across the board. Ed Balls and Yvette Cooper being interviewed. What? Let's go back. Let's take stock. And let's live in a society where we have clear rules that we all know in advance, and then we can consistently enforce them. And that, I think, is much more important than what I see as, frankly, a transitory Prime Minister.
Wise words. Fewer, better rules. Understandable rules. Well, one can dream. Stephen Parrott, thank you so much for joining us, as always.
Yes, we don't want anarchy. We don't want no rules. Just simple to apply rules, simple to live by rules.
I think someone once said if you wanted to print out every single law that we have in the United Kingdom, you'd need rooms and rooms of sort of library shelves. So no one human could ever understand every single rule that we have to follow in this country.
Oh, well, I feel very ruled upon. Anyway, we've got lots more coming up on today's show. Lawyers representing the alleged victims in the Fayed sex abuse scandal have now implicated Fulham Football Club. We'll have more on this after the break.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
Stay-at-home dads, good or bad?
I personally think when you just have a baby, your hormones are all over the place, you're breastfeeding, to go back to work, I feel personally it's a big old thing. And I think babies really need their mums. On the other side, if a stay-at-home dad was a stay-at-home dad for years, I would also say, well, come on now, the children are in school. What's the issue? Why can't you go back to work?
It's really interesting because my husband's been a stay-at-home dad for 6 months and is working part-time. We both work part-time now. And that was always the choice that we were going to make. And it's been the best thing ever for my family. My husband and my daughter have the most incredible bond. He's much more practical, playful, and a better problem solver than me.
I mean, the problem I see, Annette, with all of this is that you do get a lot of women who say,
you know, we don't want the stereotype. We don't like the stereotypes. When men say, "Well, actually, I want to be the parent staying at home and looking after the child," it's frowned upon. So you can't have it both ways.
I wouldn't say that's a long-term stay-at-home dad. And also, we're talking about actually dads should look after their children, and we shouldn't be praising them and say, oh, they're underappreciated for changing a nappy. That's their duty.
I think it takes real guts as a man to decide that you're going to give up those things that society deems so highly, even if it's for a short time.
Why is it then, Annette, that you say your dads should go back to work?
I read an article about a dad who was a stay-at-home dad for 15 years, pursuing his hobbies and fitness and all that. Now, I just don't think that's fair.
GB News, the People's Channel.
The king of breakfast TV is back. That's right. Britain's favourite TV host, Eamon Holmes, returns to Britain's hottest breakfast programme. Breakfast every day from 6 a.m. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
If you want your news to be straight talking... This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again. Down to earth. It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it? And most importantly, honest. Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them. Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 29 minutes past 1. Now, lawyers representing alleged victims in the Al-Fayed sex abuse scandal have now implicated Fulham Club. No, Fulham Football Club.
Anyway, previously, Fulham said the club remain in the process of establishing whether anyone at the club is or has been affected by the reports concerning Mr Al-Fayed.
Well, let's get more with our correspondent Cameron Walker, because, Cameron, this story just keeps growing.
Yeah, a lengthy statement from the lawyers representing the victims and survivors this afternoon. They say they fielded well over 200 inquiries and messages since the initial BBC investigation was made public into the alleged sexual abuse by Mohammed Al-Fayed, and they say these inquiries coming from all over the world. So this is very much global, not just in London. A number of the alleged offences took place in Paris, for example, at his villa there. But now they can confirm, the lawyers, that they are representing 60 survivors of Al-Fayed's abuse. So a huge, huge number there. And they also said last week, when I was in a press conference, that they expect anywhere that Mohammed Al-Fayed went, that abuse would follow. And they say this afternoon that sadly this has proven to be true. We are now in the possession of credible evidence of abuse at other Al-Fayed properties and businesses, including, as you said in your introduction, Fulham Football Club. Now, Fulham Football Club has released a statement this afternoon where they say, we remain in the process of establishing whether anyone at the club is or has been affected by the reports concerning Mr Al-Fayed. In the meantime, should any person wish to share information or experiences on this matter, they may contact the club. This is clearly not just about Mr Fayed here, because although he died last year at the age of 94, there appears to be a number of associates, lawyers seem to be suggesting, that could well have questions to answer. Notably, the General Medical Council is investigating 2 private doctors who used to work for Mr Fayed, who allegedly carried out intrusive and unnecessary sexual health screenings on Mr Fayed's victims before he abused them. That's just one example. There's also allegations against security guards locking doors behind victims so they couldn't escape. So it appears this is just the beginning of the litigation.
By the sounds of it, absolutely prolific in his abuse of women over many years, and as you say, in so many different locations. With regards to Fulham Football Club, is the allegation that he was abusing women at the club or people or using that space in order to abuse women? What was going on?
There's certainly no details, concrete details at the moment. They were asked about it, the lawyers at the press conference last week, where they said they seem to suggest that they had allegations related to Fulham Football Club, but now they're in a position to confirm that those allegations have been, and they found credible evidence, and I quote, about Fulham Football Club. But as to the details, we don't have that yet.
So I suppose this is going to be a story where any property anywhere in the world where Mr. Fayed was the proprietor, the owner, even associated with, there will be these stories.
Absolutely. This was a very, very powerful man, Tom, and it's the same kind of MO, isn't it, or of people such as Jeffrey Epstein or Harvey Weinstein, a powerful person with a lot of money, with a lot of connections, and the victims were silenced, essentially. A number of the allegations that the lawyers have been speaking about, both in the BBC documentary and in the press conference and subsequent statements, is just not so much the cover-up, but just how the victims felt like they couldn't speak out at the time because they were allegedly threatened by either Fayed or his associates.
And you can understand why. I mean, the Met had complaints from 19 women between 2005 and 2023. Nothing happened.
Yeah.
Nothing happened. I mean, why would a woman bother coming forward, risk their career, risk their livelihood, risk their reputation if people say that they're lying and the like, with such a powerful man, if the police don't even take it seriously? There are questions around potential corruption here, isn't there?
Yeah, and the Crown Prosecution Service failed to prosecute Mr. Fayed twice during his lifetime. The Metropolitan Police presented him with evidence in 2008 and 2013, two separate cases. And a former detective of the Met Police has spoken to Sky News in the last 24 hours, actually, suggesting that when Fayed was in charge of Harrods, in order to get extra police protection for the Harrods store around Christmas time, Harrods would send out hampers to them and even pay for their alcoholic drinks for the Metropolitan Police's Christmas party. So it appears there are a lot of questions to answer.
Huge questions. Well, Cameron Walker, thank you for running us through all of them.
Yes, well, we've got lots more coming up on today's show. Tory leadership hopeful Robert Jenrick, he's pledging to block foreign aid to countries that refuse deportations. We're getting the thoughts of a former immigration minister after your headlines with Tatiana.
Tom, Emily, thank you. The top stories. Britain's youngest knife murderers, who were aged 12 when they killed Sean Sisahai with a machete, have both been sentenced to life with a minimum term of 8.5 years. The killers were convicted in June of murdering the 19-year-old who was stabbed in the heart and also suffered a fractured skull in November last year in Wolverhampton. They are the youngest convicted murderers in the UK since Jamie Bulger's killers Robert Thompson and John Venables back in 1993. Barristers representing alleged victims of Mohammed Al-Fayed say there are now 60 survivors and they have credible evidence of abuse at Fulham Football Club. The former Harrods and Fulham FC owners accused of multiple sexual assaults after a BBC investigation published last week. A spokesman for Justice for Harrods survivors, a group of barristers representing the alleged victims, say there's been an enormous response to the investigation. Their statement also said there are more to come. Sir Keir Starmer's called for Israel and terror group Hezbollah to agree to a ceasefire, saying escalation serves no one. Speaking at the United Nations General Assembly, the Prime Minister implored the two sides to step back from the brink. It concludes Sir Keir Starmer's three-day trip to New York after attending the annual meeting of world leaders. It comes after the Israeli Prime Minister said his nation's troops would keep fighting at full force and that news of a potential ceasefire deal was not true. However, Benjamin Netanyahu has since said negotiations on a ceasefire in Lebanon will continue despite his insistence that the IDF maintains its offensive against Hezbollah. Netanyahu's statement adds that Israel shares the aims of the US-led initiative of enabling people along the northern border to return safely and securely to their homes. Netanyahu is preparing to address the United Nations today. That says an Israeli airstrike early this morning reportedly killed 9 people from the same family in the southern Lebanese border town of Sheba, including 4 children. Meanwhile, Israeli air defences say they intercepted multiple rockets over the northern city of Haifa this morning. Defence Secretary John Healey says it's a good sign that Netanyahu is attending the assembly today. And some breaking news. 2 Just Stop Oil activists have been jailed for pouring soup over Vincent van Gogh's Sunflowers at London's National Gallery in 2022. 23-year-old Phoebe Plummer and 22-year-old Anna Holland have been jailed for 2 years and 20 months, respectively. They threw 2 tins of Heinz tomato soup over the 1888 work, which is covered by glass, before kneeling down in front of the painting and gluing their hands to the wall beneath it. And those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Tatiana Sanchez. More from me in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Time for your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. After some very heavy rain in the south this week, it looks a lot drier for most places out there today. Pretty chilly in a brisk breeze with some sunny spells and a few showers. This low pressure brought all the heavy rain yesterday and last night, still across the far southeast this morning, but it's pulling away and allowing the winds to come down from the north. Quite a brisk wind blowing along these North Sea coasts, bringing a real chill and a few scattered showers. Showers across northern Scotland, 1 or 2 dotted around elsewhere, particularly in West Wales. But for most it'll be dry and bright with some spells of sunshine, certainly a lot drier than it has been across the Midlands. It is pretty chilly though, temperatures struggling, only 14, 15 at the very best, and parts of the north struggling to get into double figures. Feeling colder when you add that wind on, which will be particularly lively along the east coast and across parts of northeast Scotland, where it continues to blow the showers in here, and temperatures will drop away fairly sharply this evening too. Showers will keep going across Northern Ireland, and some will feed down through the Irish Sea into North Wales and along the west coast of Wales. But for much of England and Wales, it'll be a dry evening, leading to a dry night and a clear night. And with those clear skies and as the winds start to ease, it is going to turn pretty cold overnight. Some pockets of frost are possible, certainly across northern England and southern Scotland. Northern Scotland won't be as cold as last night because here more cloud will arrive, bringing some outbreaks of rain. But elsewhere, well down into single digits. The countryside, as I said, likely to be pretty close to freezing. So a chilly start to Saturday for sure, but quite a fine start for the bulk of England and Wales, dry and sunny. Quite a lot of cloud for Scotland. There'll be some showery rain drifting through the central belt. We'll keep some showers going through the day across western and northern Scotland. Not much getting to eastern Scotland. And so we'll continue with sunny spells over parts of the Midlands, East Anglia and the southeast. The wind's not as strong tomorrow, but again, it will be on the chilly side.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon. Hello, I'm Jules Buckley. Big queues for the M5 northbound as you head away from Cribs Causeway 17 up towards the M4 at 15. Follows earlier flooding. The A38 that runs parallel just west of there is still struggling as a result following the earlier diversion. Into Reading, the A4 London Road heading westbound shut for flooding. No way through between Sutton's Park Avenue and the Sutton Seeds roundabout. Flooding also means in Bedford, the northbound side of the A6 Paula Radcliffe Way is closed from Clapham Road up towards the Oakley turn-off. And flooding means in Bedfordshire, the A421 between the Marshall Age roundabout in Kempston and the M1 at 13, that's closed both ways. A collision for the A303 eastbound in Hampshire means a closure from the A34 Bullington Cross through towards Mitchell Dever Station. That's queuing as well.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Welcome back. This is Good Afternoon Britain. Now, the Tory leadership hopeful Robert Jenrick, he's been making quite a few headlines recently, but today he's set out plans to increase the deportation of illegal immigrants living in the UK fivefold if he ever becomes Prime Minister.
Yes, the Member of Parliament for Newark and former Immigration Minister has also said he would end foreign aid and severely restrict visas to those countries who refuse to cooperate on returns, with India and Vietnam believed to be particular targets of this policy.
Well, we can just discuss this further now with former Immigration Minister Kevin Foster. Kevin, thank you very much indeed for joining us on this one. Robert Jenrick, does what he's saying, does it make sense to you?
Yes, it does. You know, if we decide that enforcing our borders, stopping the boats are going to be the government's biggest priority, then you should use every tool available, and that includes diplomatic leverage, including our foreign aid budget. And, you know, the UK does take back from overseas our citizens who've abused the hospitality of other countries by committing criminal offences or breaking their immigration rules. It's not unreasonable to say, well, in return, the same happens. And actually, for some nationals of those countries, this could have a real advantage, because if we can easily return people, it can make us more confident in actually granting visas to nationals of those countries. Where it's near impossible to return people, then you do have to consider in the process of granting visas or them being visa countries that as part of it. So it's part of one, making us more secure, and actually in the long run, making it for nationals from other countries who genuinely want to come here and do what they say they want to go do and then go home after perhaps a short holiday here, more able to do that. So no, this makes absolute sense what Rob's saying today.
It is interesting, of course, because one of the reasons behind the Rwanda deportation scheme is that countries like India and Vietnam have been very reluctant to take back citizens that have arrived in the UK illegally. It seems bizarre that we haven't had a quid pro quo for accepting visas from these countries in the past.
Well, there's always been some issues with some countries we deal with around returns. I think the small boats issue is what's brought it very much in to sharp focus. But I think a lot of it is about making a clear decision as a government, particularly as a potential prime minister, that is what you will prioritise, and then get the whole engine of government focus on it. I think that's probably what Rob, based on his experience in the Home Office, is now looking to do, and I genuinely welcome it. Then, of course, even with these sorts of things being done, we should remember there'll still be countries where we cannot deal with. So, for example, Assad's Syria, we're not going to probably be having too many discussions with that regime, where you'd still need a solution like Rwanda for nationals from those countries. But it's absolutely right that if we say border security is our top priority, that we use the leverage we've got available. And that is going to mean things like free trade deals as well.
I mean, Kevin, is the pledge to cut aid to countries like India if they don't take back failed asylum seekers? Do we even really give aid in the traditional sense to India and other countries like it? I thought that we sort of gave money to projects where we were hoping for a return in investment rather than traditional sort of charitable aid. I mean, would that be the threat, that we don't really invest in their economy in such a way? I'm not really sure exactly. I don't think we give foreign aid in the traditional sense.
No, we don't. Certainly one of the things David Cameron did was to start to end aid to countries that had space programs and their own nuclear weapons programs, which, if you can afford those two, you really don't need money from us to fund basic needs of your citizens. So that's probably more of a statement around, for example, countries in Africa. But similarly, there is visa sanctions. And I remember having to use them against one country that was refusing to take back even its own criminals, very serious criminals due to be released from jail. The government concerned wasn't particularly interested in taking them back, as we would have, by the way, in the same circumstance with a British citizen who'd abused their hospitality in the way that particular person had done ours. And in that instance, you look at restricting visas. You do have to be determined to do that, because, we're talking about things like students coming into the country, visitors, business persons. But again, it is that leverage as well as the...
Kevin, you sound like you think this is a great idea. Rob Jenrick obviously has proposed it, but of course you've both been in the Home Office. The Conservative Party were in government for 14 years. If this is such a wonderful idea, and we've been being taken for a ride for years and years and years by accepting back our own foreign criminals when other countries refuse to do the same in a vice versa way, why on earth didn't you implement it when you were in government?
Well, it's certainly something I'd have liked to be more aggressive with whilst in, as you say, Rob's been in the Home Office, as I've been in the Home Office, and I think we both see the need for a coordinated push across government. And, if people want to see something like that happening now, then someone like Rob is the sort of person we want to see, leading forward with it. But look, there is, of course, more we could do. One of the lessons we have to learn from the scale of the defeat we had in July was that the public wanted to see us do more on immigration and the border. And they don't just want to hear us talk about it or come up with a new slogan. What they want to see us come up with is real plans. And, I'm be honest, I'm still undecided on the leadership, but I'd say this is a great intervention from Rob today.
OK, well, thank you very much indeed, Kevin Foster, former Immigration Minister. Thank you very much indeed for your time. I mean, as a country, we've dished out hundreds of thousands of work visas, study visas, visitor visas to people from India. I mean, surely there should be some kind of agreement when it comes to
I know India does
failed
take
asylum seekers and
people back.
criminals.
Not as a rule. They don't have the sort of immediate sort of yes, of course we'll take back a foreign criminal sort of thing. It does seem that
there's such a soft touch.
In so many examples of these international rules, we set ourselves the absolute highest standard of going above and beyond, and no one else reciprocates.
I would say that Robert Jenrick is making the most noise, I would say. He's making the most headlines, isn't he? He's pushing out these policy proposals like nobody's business.
And yet, it's only next week, when it's only a few days now, when we'll see the 4 contenders all give their speeches in front of the Tory party conference, and pretty soon we'll see who's won that race. It feels like it's been going on for a little while. It also feels like not many people are that interested.
We'll be hoping people are listening. Lots more coming up on today's show. Hurricane Helen batters Florida across the pond. Here, the Met Office issues 185 warnings for flooding. But there seems to be bad weather everywhere.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
I'm not saying I don't want to be a mum, and I'm not saying I don't want to work, but it's definitely not easy.
It's just really tough for us mums, you know. Our job's never done, our work is never finished, and I think it's this movement, the real out-of-office movement, is something that just really resonates with me, and I think we should all talk more about how much work we do. I think a woman's work is never done, but I just think we all feel guilty. We have that mum guilt, you know. If you're working and being successful, you wish you were at home with the kids. And if you're at home, you're thinking, am I doing enough work?
Yeah, and of course the cost of childcare in this country means that a lot of families just frankly make that decision to have one of the parents stay at home, usually the mum, and they're just being squeezed out of the economy, and that's not good either.
Once you've done your job as a working mum, you come home and you're doing another 8 hours on top of it.
Mothers have a tendency, definitely historically, just to crack on with it. It's just something that they are expected to do, that they do without moaning. And now it's like,
Are we getting to a stage where
go
down that well? In my experience, I have had someone say to me, well, if you can't handle it, why do you have kids? You know.
Absolutely. And yet, exactly that. We just need to talk about it, and I think it's healthy, and I think that's the main thing now, that we should be brave enough to be able to say, do you know what, sometimes it's difficult, but I'm really proud to be a working mum, and I tell my daughters that. I work really, really hard, and it's a good work ethic for them, you know, and that's what, you know, this campaign's all about.
Is there some resistance still, do you think, from some parts of society?
I do think there's resistance, and that's what this is about, is to try and get people talking about the fact that it has been awkward in the past, and some people don't understand a working mum's life, and that's why we need to try and talk about it.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry, Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Well, welcome back. It is now 1:51, and we're going to have a little look in our inbox because lots of you have been getting in touch, particularly about that sentencing of those two killers who were only 12 years old when they murdered a man with a machete. Mike says, shut up, Emily. Oh, thank you very much, Mike. You're in danger of letting your liberal do-gooder side show through with regard to the feral toe rag murderers. We all know that they will be model-coddled for the rest of their miserable lives and will never be any use to society, as rehabilitation is a myth Well, strong stuff from Mike.
I didn't know you
I
had
won't
a
shut
Liberal.
up, though.
I didn't know you had a Liberal do-gooder side.
Well, clearly I do, yeah, compared to you. You'll hang 'em and flog 'em.
I think we've probably swapped roles.
We have a bit. He's normally the do-gooder.
Yeah.
He's normally the airy-fairy Liberal, isn't he? Luke says, no matter how old you are, it should be life for murdering someone. Just because they're children, they shouldn't not have that. This should change as well as naming them, children or not. So you think they should be named? Vera says as well, let's hope life means life for these two boys. It doesn't look like it will. It actually certainly won't.
No, DVH says, why call it life? Why not call it how it is? 8.5 years.
Yeah, and lots of you had comments to say about what the judge was saying. She did talk a lot about mitigating circumstances. She spoke about ADHD, she spoke about vulnerability in upbringing, she spoke even about dyslexia for the second defendant, and she spoke about how one of them in particular was making lots of progress in the secure custody accommodation that he's in and, you know, committed to doing well in his work and all of that. Should that be taken into account? Christopher says, listening to the judge, it's clear the whole law system regarding child killers needs tearing up and starting again. She's on about mental health and ADHD. They aren't going to be made better in prison, so they should be locked up for life. He was capable of buying a machete and using it. Why not give a life sentence and see how they are after 50 years? Strong stuff from Christopher.
Well, Martin says the rights of burglars are placed above those of victims, and murderers are treated with kid gloves due to dyslexia or ADHD. Disgusting, in the words of Martin.
And who's this? Oh, Sharon. Now, you brought up the question of parents, about whether they should be held responsible. You say parents should be responsible for their children's crime. The child should still get a sentence. So the suggestion there that perhaps parents of children who commit heinous crimes should be, well, something should happen to them. I'm not sure what, though. Can you be responsible for someone else's crime, even if they are your child? I don't know. No. Currently, you're not. So there you go.
Got one more comment here saying that killing someone at 12 years of age indicates a psychopathic personality disorder, and psychopaths cannot be rehabilitated even. They have no conscience, no remorse, no empathy, but they're good at manipulating others. Well, that's a strong line. I don't know, can people with psychopathic personality disorder be rehabilitated? I don't know.
No, I think once a psychopath, always a psychopath.
Can't we sort of, you know, pump them with drugs to make them nicer, or...?
I think they can pretend, they can mirror, they can pretend to be a nice person.
But you'd never know if they had actually reformed or not. That's the point.
Up next, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is going to deliver a speech to the United Nations. That's next.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Afternoon, welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. The weekend will bring quite a lot of fine and dry weather, but it will be pretty chilly to start with, and more wet and windy weather is on the way for later Sunday. That's coming from this area of low pressure behind me. We've got high pressure moving in at the moment. This low brought all the heavy rain and the flooding over the past couple of days. That's out of the way. We've now got northerly winds bringing a few showers, but quite a lot of fine and dry weather. But northerly winds also bring a chill, and it is going to be pretty cold overnight tonight. Temperatures are going to dip down with these clearer skies across the heart of England and Wales, well down to 3 or 4 degrees. That's in towns and cities. Some rural spots may well dip down to freezing. On to Saturday, and yes, a chilly start, by and large, a fine and sunny one for England and Wales. More cloud tomorrow for Scotland and Northern Ireland. Still a bit more cloud coming into parts of Wales and southwest England. The odd shower, 1 or 2 showers into North Norfolk to start the day. For Northern Ireland and Scotland, quite a lot of cloud here too, but maybe a bright start across the borders. Cloud and some outbreaks of showery rain across the bulk of Scotland. So that'll continue. So rain on and off over western Scotland, but I suspect much of the east of Scotland will brighten up a little through the day with maybe a bit of brightness. The wind's not as strong tomorrow as well. So with these lengthy spells of sunshine across England and Wales, although we start pretty cold and temperatures by the afternoon will still be a touch below average for the time of year. It'll probably feel a little bit warmer, certainly feeling a bit warmer than today. Generally 11 or 12 in Scotland, further south, we might squeak up to 15 Celsius. And then on Sunday, again, a chilly start, but a dry start for most. And many northern and eastern parts will stay that way, but down to the south and west, rain will be marching in. And winds. We have a Met Office yellow warning in place for those gusty winds spreading across parts of Wales and southwest England during Sunday. Bye for now.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
You could be the next Great British Giveaway winner with a whopping £36,000 in tax-free cash in your bank account. Imagine getting the winning phone call for that.
£30,000 cash? Oh my God, I'm going to cry.
Yes, you see, that is absolutely fantastic.
Look at the moon. Oh my God, this is amazing.
For another chance to win £36,000 in tax-free cash, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries cost £2, or post your name and number to GB08, PO Box 8690, Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 25th of October. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Mark Dolan tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment. This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory. Don't miss my big opinion. Mark meets and my take at 10. Democracy is a funny old thing. And we don't do boring. Not on my watch. I just won't have it. Let's go and get another glass of that bubbly. You've earned it. That's Mark Dolan tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry, Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there short and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 2 o'clock on Friday, the 27th of September. I'm Tom Harwood.
And I'm Emily Carver.
Britain's youngest knife murderers sentenced. A pair of 13-year-old boys have been sentenced to life with a minimum of 8.5 years in prison for the brutal murder of 19-year-old Sean Cisahi in 2023. We'll bring you the very latest from Nottingham Crown Court.
Creative accounting, the government has complained of a £22 billion black hole for months. Yet today we learn Chancellor Rachel Reeves may change the rules to borrow £50 billion more. How on earth does that add up?
And in the next hour, Benjamin Netanyahu will address the UN General Assembly. The Israeli Prime Minister has frustrated US officials this week by sending mixed messages over accepting US-led proposals for a 21-day ceasefire. We're going to have the very latest on this fiery speech.
And is it time for horrified Harry to hurry home? In his latest stunt, the Duke of Sussex has visited a haunted maze. There he is. It comes as former Prime Minister Boris Johnson reveals he tried to convince the Prince not to leave the UK back in 2020. How did that go?
And as we heard in the last half hour, there's been sentencing handed down to two Just Stop Oil activists. Phoebe and Anna have been sentenced to 2 years and 20 months in prison. for throwing soup over Van Gogh's Sunflowers painting.
Yeah. Now, Phoebe Plummer, I think everyone knows Phoebe Plummer. She's the one with the multicoloured hair. Yeah. Or at least hair that changes colour.
Do they all have multicoloured hair?
No, just Phoebe.
OK.
Just Phoebe. She's special Phoebe. She's involved in all of this stuff. But anyway, actually sentenced to jail. Now, it's interesting because about 100 artists decided to all sign a letter demanding that they don't go to jail. They said that actually this type of stunt is in the ethos of art, and I wonder whether they would appreciate such a thing to happen to their artwork.
I'm not
or
sure
just to Van Gogh.
I'm not sure that's how the criminal justice system works. If you get 100 people to sign a petition, I'm not sure you can get someone off doing a crime.
Well, they had a lot to say about it. They thought it would be outrageous if they were sent to jail for such a thing.
But let's
this is
be honest,
art in action in their view.
This isn't just about a stunt where they throw soup over a painting. This is about particular... I don't know so much about this Anna person, but this Phoebe person, who I've actually been on a panel with in the past. I've met her, and she just keeps on doing stunt after stunt after stunt. She blocks cars in the roads. She's turned up at Keir Starmer's family home, although now I suppose we don't know whether he and his family were actually at that home at that time or borrowing a penthouse. But she just keeps on breaching orders and rules, and it's hard to see how actually anything will work other than physically putting her behind bars, because it's clear she's not going to follow any of the orders that have been given to her, any of the restraining orders or the restrictions that have been placed on her by courts in the past.
I mean, she behaves like a little spoiled, entitled girl.
Just the law doesn't apply.
I mean, why don't her parents just, lock her in her room, prevent her from doing it, unless perhaps they support her in it? I don't know. Anyway, gbnews.com/your say. Is that justice, then, behind bars for chucking soup all over an iconic piece of artwork? Anyway, let's get the news headlines with Tatiana.
Emily, thank you. The top stories this hour. Britain's youngest knife murderers, who were aged 12 when they killed Sean Ceasahai with a machete, have both been sentenced to life with a minimum term of 8.5 years. The killers were convicted in June of murdering the 19-year-old who was stabbed in the heart and suffered a fractured skull in November last year in Wolverhampton. They're the youngest convicted murderers in the UK since Jamie Bulger's killers Robert Thompson and John Venables back in 1993. Let's listen to what Chief Superintendent of West Midlands Police Kim Maddell had to say.
His family are understandably heartbroken and mourning their beloved son, and our thoughts and sympathies will remain with them. Today's sentence can never make up for Sean's life being taken, but we hope it can bring some comfort to all those who loved him. Sean was only 19 when his life was taken at the hands of two boys, then aged just 12, who had armed themselves with a machete. That reality has had a huge impact on us all.
Barristers representing alleged victims of Mohammed Al-Fayed say there are now 60 survivors and they have credible evidence of abuse at Fulham Football Club. The former Harrods and Fulham FC owners accused of multiple sexual assaults after a BBC investigation published last week. A spokesman for Justice for Harrods survivors, a group of barristers representing the alleged victims, say there's been an enormous response to the investigation. Their statement also said there are more to come. Sir Keir Starmer's called for Israel and terror group Hezbollah to agree to a ceasefire, saying escalation serves no one. Speaking at the United Nations General Assembly, the Prime Minister implored the two sides to step back from the brink. Sir Keir also discussed the importance of a ceasefire deal with his Lebanese counterpart. It includes Sir Keir Starmer's 3-day trip to New York after attending the annual meeting of world leaders. It comes after the Israeli Prime Minister said his nation's troops would keep fighting at full force and that news of a potential ceasefire deal was not true. Benjamin Netanyahu has since said, though, that negotiations on a ceasefire in Lebanon will continue, despite his insistence that the IDF maintains its offensive against Hezbollah. Netanyahu's statement today added that Israel shares the aims of the US-led initiative of enabling people along the northern border to return safely and securely to their homes. Netanyahu is preparing to address the United Nations today. An Israeli strike early this morning, meanwhile, reportedly killed 9 people from the same family in the southern Lebanese border town of Shibra, including 4 children. Meanwhile, Israeli air defences say they intercepted multiple rockets over the northern city of Haifa this morning. Defence Secretary John Healey says it's a good sign that Netanyahu is attending the assembly.
It's good that the Prime Minister from Israel is in the United Nations today. He will hear about the calls from many countries, led by the United States and Britain, for an immediate ceasefire in Lebanon, 21 days in which the fighting should stop on both sides. That gives everyone a chance to concentrate on the peace plan that is on the table, that the Israelis themselves say would allow them to get their citizens back into northern Israel and the Lebanese to return to their homes in southern Lebanon. That's what we should all be working for.
Now, 2 Just Stop Oil activists have been jailed for pouring soup over Vincent van Gogh's sunflowers at London's National Gallery in 2022. Well, GB News' national reporter Charlie Peters is at Southwark Crown Court for us. Charlie, good afternoon. What more can you tell us?
Extreme, disproportionate and criminally idiotic. That's how Mr. Justice Hare described the criminal damage that Phoebe Plummer and Anna Holland put on the priceless Van Gogh, priceless sunflowers painting last year in that damage that they were convicted of earlier this year. Now, they were sentenced to 27 months and 20 months respectively. And Phoebe Plummer gave a pre-sentencing speech in the courtroom where she compared herself to a political prisoner. Mr. Justice here interrupted those proceedings to say that they were deeply offensive. Now, outside the court, there is a protest taking place, a silent protest where they say they are gathering on behalf of political prisoners. You can see a man just in front of us with a Julian Assange sign showing a wide range of views being shown and displayed here. Lots of people comparing the imprisonment of Phoebe Plummer and Anna Holland with Martin Luther King and Julian Assange and other people who were being described as political prisoners. Now, 2 other people were also sentenced here at Southwark Crown Court earlier today. Chiara Sati and Daniel Hall, they were given suspended community orders and some unpaid work after they were involved in a slow march protest earlier last year. That's all of the proceedings that took place at Southwark Crown Court.
Charlie, thank you very much. That's GB News' national reporter Charlie Peters there for us. Thank you. In other news, Russell Friendly has been elected as the new leader of the Scottish Conservatives. The MSP saw off competition from Murdo Fraser and Megan Gallagher in the battle to replace Douglas Ross. This announcement comes ahead of the UK Conservative Party revealing Rishi Sunak's successor on the 2nd of November.
I want to start by thanking everyone who put their faith in me and thank obviously to every single member who voted for me and every every supporter who worked so hard for my campaign. And thank you, of course, to my fellow candidates, Megan and Murdo, who I greatly respect and value, along with the rest of my MSP colleagues. Now, everyone must come together as one united team. Let's start the hard work right now to win back public trust.
And more than 180 flood warnings and alerts are in place across England after days of heavy rain forcing closures of a motorway as drivers abandoned their cars. Images posted on social media also showed tracks at a train station in Shropshire completely submerged in water. The Met Office says northern and central parts of England and Wales had been hit the hardest. And now a new weather warning for strong winds has now been issued for Sunday. And those strong winds may cause further disruption across the southwest of England and also across Wales. And those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Tatiana Sanchez. More from me in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 11 minutes past 2. Now, the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, is set to address the UN General Assembly shortly as conflict in the Middle East continues to escalate.
Yes, despite initial optimism that Israel shared the aims of the US-led ceasefire proposal, a government statement on Thursday confirmed that the Prime Minister had not even responded to it.
And all this comes as Netanyahu ordered the Israeli military to keep hitting Hezbollah at full force in Lebanon, with airstrikes having killed more than 630 people in the country since Monday.
OK, well, for more on this, we're joined by GBNews Home and Security Editor Mark White. Mark, this speech to the United Nations, clearly very important indeed, very controversial what's been going on. There was talk of a ceasefire, then there wasn't talk of a ceasefire. Where exactly are we?
Well, no ceasefire as yet. And remember, there's an imperative as far as Israel's concerned, now as they've stated this as one of their war goals, is to get those northern Israeli communities back into their homes. For a year now, virtually, 70,000 people have been living in Haifa and other cities evacuated from their communities on the border with southern Lebanon because of all of these rocket attacks and drone attacks that have been coming over from the Hezbollah terror group. Now, of course, the conflict in Gaza is one thing, and that was, of course, sparked by the terrorist attacks on the 7th of October last year, which then resulted in Israel going in to deal with Hamas. But virtually the next day after that terrorist attack, Hezbollah started firing rockets, missiles and drones into Israel. And since October of last year, more than 9,000 of these projectiles have gone into Israel. Israel said enough is enough, and that's why they are dealing with Hezbollah at the moment. But the real concern, as Benjamin Netanyahu prepares to address the United Nations, is that we are heading down the road of an escalating crisis that turns into a regional war. That's everybody's fear. And for our audience who might think that's a Middle East crisis far away, we shouldn't worry about that. We don't care about that. We should care about that because our military is going to have to be involved initially in evacuations, but also potentially dealing with, as we saw earlier this year, with a huge missile attack from Iran and other proxies on Israel, trying to take down those projectiles as they head into Israel. So in danger. And that's not even to mention the Houthis attacking all of the shipping in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. It's an absolute mess that nobody wants to see escalate any further. And that's why, of course, there is tremendous pressure now on Benjamin Netanyahu to sign up to this ceasefire deal.
It is, of course, a concerning situation when we look at the state of the world economy right now, when we look at the cost of energy, when we look at the supply lines that have to get around this part of the world if they're going to get from East Asia to the United Kingdom in any short space of time. What is the real risk here that this spills over beyond tit-for-tat rockets and rockets to something that is much, much larger, to a full-scale war?
There is a real risk, and a lot of it depends on what Hezbollah intends to do when they can get themselves organised again. Hopefully we can bring you some live pictures looking into southern Lebanon, the town of Tyre in southern. We don't have those images as yet, but we can show you the Israeli military on the northern border in Israel, the tanks preparing to go into southern Lebanon if that is what the Israeli commanders deem is appropriate at the end of the day. Those hundreds of tanks now massing on the border with Lebanon because they've been able, having prosecuted a war in Gaza for the best part of a year, that war if not winding down, it's certainly in a phase where it's a bit more controlled from Israel's point of view. They've been able to put some of their military resources further north to that border with Lebanon should the Prime Minister, the War Cabinet, decide that a ground invasion is necessary.
What to the idea, and you hear this quite a lot, that if Israel were to stop its activities in Gaza, then Hezbollah would stop firing rockets, and therefore that is what Israel should do?
Well, I think there's legitimacy to that argument. Hezbollah has said that the rockets have been coming over in support of Hamas. Of course, the proof is in the pudding. If, you know, there was an agreement in ceasefire, a ceasefire in Gaza, would they stop? The hope would be that they would. So, of course, that puts added emphasis on the need for a ceasefire in Gaza. But in the first instance, they need some kind of cessation of the hostilities in northern Israel as well to stop this escalating into a wider regional conflagration. Those shots you're looking at the moment, that's the Iron Dome missiles in Israel heading up into the sky, exploding to take out the rockets and the drones and the missiles, indeed, that have been coming over from Hezbollah and associated groups in recent days.
Mark, thank you very much for bringing us all of that. We turn now to some breaking news. Dame Maggie Smith has died in hospital on Friday. Her sons Chris Larkin and Tony Stevens said in a statement.
Yes, we're just hearing this now. So she passed aged 89 on Friday, peacefully in hospital early in the morning, this morning. The statement goes on to say she is an intensively private person. She was with friends and family at the end. She leaves 2 sons, 5 loving grandchildren, devastated by the loss of their extraordinary mother and grandmother. They go on to say, we'd like to take this opportunity to thank the wonderful staff at the Chelsea and Westminster Hospital for their care and unstinting kindness during her final days. We thank you for all your kind messages and support and ask that you respect our privacy at this time.
Of course, generations will know the work of Dame Maggie Smith. Younger generations will remember her for her work as Minerva McGonagall in Harry Potter and, of course, in the Downton Abbey series as well. But, of course, her career was stretching back far, far beyond this century. She won Academy Awards for her films in the 1960s and 1970s. She won 5 BAFTAs, 2 Oscars, 4 Emmy Awards, 3 Golden Globe Awards and a Tony Award, as well as nominations for 6 Laurence Olivier Awards. That is an impressive accolade of recognition, and I struggle to think of any actress or actor who surpasses it.
Yeah, just looking at all of the different plays, films, drama series, theatre performances, all of her accolades. What a career. What a career. Absolutely. People might remember her in A Room with a View, or The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie, and of course the more recent work in Harry Potter and Downton Abbey. So many films, but also plays as well. A multi-talented actress of stage and of screen. Born in 1934 in Ilford, Essex, on the 28th of December. This statement from her children, from her 2 sons, just released that breaking news that she has sadly passed away in hospital. They ask for privacy at this moment, but they've shared their thanks for the hospital and everyone that looked after her. Well, Ellie Costello has been looking back at Dame Maggie Smith's life.
One of the world's most famous and distinguished actresses. Dame Maggie Smith was loved the world over. In an expansive career spanning 7 decades, she starred in over 16 television series and films.
Go with God, Crispy.
But perhaps Dame Maggie Smith was most famous for her starring role in the Harry Potter franchise. as the formidable Professor Minerva McGonagall.
That was bloody brilliant.
Oh, thank you for that assessment, Mr. Weasley.
From 2010, Maggie Smith appeared as Violet Crawley, Dowager Countess of Grantham in Downton Abbey.
You're a woman with a brain and reasonable ability. Stop whining and find something to do.
The show became a cultural phenomenon, with her character stealing practically every scene that she's in.
Oh, do you think I might have a drink?
Despite her popularity, Dame Maggie Smith famously said that she never actually watched Downton Abbey herself, but she did have the box set. Having received the highest achievement for film, television and theatre, comprising of 2 Oscar Awards, a Tony Award and 4 Primetime Emmys. In 1990, Maggie Smith was made a Dame by Queen Elizabeth II for her contributions to the arts. She received the Companion of Honour for her services to drama in 2014. She was married twice and had 2 sons, the actors Chris Larkin and Toby Stevens. She is survived too by 5 grandchildren. Dame Maggie Smith will be remembered for her quick wit, her comedic timing, and being one of Britain's most recognisable and much-loved actresses.
Wow, that was the sad news and fairly shocking news as well.
Yeah, very sad indeed. Mark White is still here in the studio, and you were just saying to us while we were watching that you were just watching one of her films.
Yeah, I had a couple of hours to spare on my recent holiday, and I came across it on Netflix, actually, and I remember seeing the prime of Miss Jean Brodie as a child and just clicked on it, and it's just the most incredible film. She's amazing in it as this teacher at an all-girls school in Edinburgh, and it's all about her sort of unorthodox teaching methods for these young girls under a tutelage. My girls, as she would say in her Edinburgh best Edinburgh accent, even though she was from Essex. But it was great and iconic and an amazing and clever film that won her an Oscar, I think.
It won her an Oscar. It came out in 1969.
I was 3 years old. That's how old I am.
which also suggests the spread of her career, just how many different generations of people the world over will have known her work at different points in their lives.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we know her from Downton Abbey, and she was so formidable as a character in Downton Abbey as well. Everybody looked forward to the scenes that she was in. She stole those scenes because of her formidable acting talent. But, she was a great Hollywood star as well. You've mentioned those Harry Potter movies, but the Best Exotic Marigold Hotel, she was in that, and the sequel as well. Quite a controversial character initially because, she was an elderly woman in the UK, quite racist in her views about Indian doctors, but then went to this retirement home in a hotel. That's the premise of the film, and softened and was a really beautiful, loving character in that as well. And, of course, most recently, I remember seeing her in The Lady in the Van, which was another great show. This eccentric character that was just living in a van in a residential street in London, just completely bothering all her neighbours and being so incredibly funny to boot.
Yes, a number of comedy films. Quartet was another one where she played one of 4 musicians in a retirement home. A very funny film.
I think it's clear she had a tremendous sense of humour, and it's just her deadpan, dry delivery at times as well is just so incredibly funny in itself.
Yes, she did make you laugh, certainly. And I'm just refreshing my memory of her career here. She's been acting her entire life, starting in the theatre and then, of course, moving to all of these fantastic films. Quite incredible, and drama series, of course, as well. Thank you very much, Mark, for telling us, what you will take from her fantastic career.
It's incredibly sad, but, what a life, what an amazing woman, and someone that genuinely was known all around the world.
Well, Mark, thank you very much. And just to repeat, that is the news that we have just learnt in the last few minutes, that Dame Maggie Smith has died.
Yes, now we're going to move on because two 13-year-old boys have been sentenced to life, but with a minimum term of 8 years and 6 months. That after being found guilty of the murder of 19-year-old Sean Sisahai in Wolverhampton last year.
Well, the pair are the youngest convicted murderers in the UK since Jamie Bulger's killers, Robert Thompson and John Venables, back in 1993. Let's cross over to our reporter Jack Carson outside Nottingham Crown Court. Jack, the country will be shocked by this sentencing.
Well, in the last few moments, we've had a statement from Dorothea Hodge, who's the UK representative from Anguilla. Now, you'll remember that Sean Sisahai, that 19-year-old that was brutally murdered in Wolverhampton Park last year by these now 13-year-olds, was only in the UK for 6 months. He'd come here to get an operation on a cataracts. Now, the family have released a statement reacting to the sentence that was handed down at Nottingham Crown Court today. They say that whilst they recognise that justice has been served in respect of the horrific murder of their beloved son Sean, they say they are disappointed with the sentence. They say that no one hearing the detail of this case could have any feeling other than horror. They say that the family had hoped the sentence would reflect the abhorrent violence that their son was subjected to in the attack in which he was killed, and they recognise that young lives have been changed, but they say that they have lost their son forever. They do not feel that the sentence represents the loss they say they have suffered daily since their son Sean's death. Now, in the 2-day sentencing that we've had here at Nottingham Crown Court, the court has heard how Sean's family had to use their life savings in order to be able to repatriate their body, his body, back to the UK. They had to take out a loan to attend the trial and have unfortunately not been able to travel again to see that justice served in person. They had to be up in the early hours of this morning to watch the sentence handed down via a video link. That sentence, as you was mentioning, is a life term with a minimum term of 8.5 years. The judge, Mrs. Justice Tipples, talking about how, of course, that the intention of the murder here, talking about how when you killed Sean, he was 19, starting out his adult life with everything to live for. The judge in her sentencing said, "I am sure you intended to kill him, but there are mitigating factors that meant that the sentence she handed down was reduced to 8.5 years as a minimum." She said that this was a spur of the moment attack. It was not premeditated, and also talked about the extreme vulnerability that she said of the first defendant, which was handed to her in the sentencing and pre-sentencing report. Now, the defendant had admitted in the trial that they'd bought the weapon from a friend for £40 around a month before the attack. In her sentencing, the judge said that he had been groomed and exploited by others, as well as having very many adverse childhood experiences, including falling victim to exploitation by criminals. In terms of the second defendant, she mentioned how they have a loving and supportive relationship with their parents, was not previously known to police. During the trial, both had tried to blame each other for inflicting the fatal blow in that attack. We've heard detail of that attack and how horrific it was, but that sentence has been handed down today for Britain's youngest knife murderers.
Well, Jack Carson, thank you very much for bringing us the very latest there from Nottingham Crown Court.
Yes, hearing from the family of the victim, clearly absolutely devastated. That question over whether justice has been served, whether that sentence really equates to the crime, the severity of the crime and the loss, of course.
They'll be out aged 20. I should amend that. They could be out aged 20 if they serve the minimum sentence. They will, if they serve the minimum sentence, they will be out before they are legally able to drink alcohol in the United States of America.
Yeah, yeah. And the loss of a life at just 19. We're going to move on because a Category 4 hurricane, Helene, has made landfall in Florida, with forecasters warning of a catastrophic storm surge that could be unsurvivable.
Winds in excess of 140 miles per hour and extreme flash floods are likely, as Florida Governor Ron DeSantis confirmed one person has died so far.
Well, here in the UK, we've seen some quite serious flooding up and down the country. To find out more, we're joined by Anna Riley, GBNews Yorkshire and Humber reporter. I mean, Anna, I'm not sure if we can make a direct comparison between the storm that's hitting Florida, but, I mean, seeing where you are, it looks like there's been quite a lot of damage done, perhaps.
Good afternoon to you both. Yes, I'm here in York where the River Ouse has overspilled. You can probably see I'm here in my wellies and it's over a metre above what it should be. I'll just step out of frame here. You can see there, that is the Ouse Bridge, and the water level has come up over a metre than it should normally be according to the Viking recorder. It should be at 1.8 metres. The river level is currently at 2.91. It's due to peak within the next hour. At 3 o'clock it's due to get to 2.97 metres, and then that water will slowly recede through the evening and into the early hours of the morning. It comes as part of multiple flood warnings. Over 170 flood warnings and alerts were issued today across England, and it comes as we've had that heavy rain throughout the week. It's caused disruption widespread across the country, not just in the north of England but also in the Midlands. That saw wide disruption this morning. Many commuters not being able to get to work because their trains were cancelled, and also the part of the M5 being closed as well in Gloucestershire due to the heavy rain and the floods that that's caused. Here in York, there's 3 flood alerts in place in the city centre and across, spanning across where the River Ouse is. In terms of impacts, you can probably see behind me as well, if I just step out of frame here, that's the King's Arms pub you can see in the background there. You can probably see the signage at the bottom where the water's come up. The picnic tables where people sit out as well, they have been submerged by water. The waterfront pub next to it as well has just recently closed because people, staff members as well as customers, are unable to get in and out from the front there. I'm next to the Lowther here at the moment where people still can get in. That business is still operating. I did speak to business owners here along this stretch of King's Snaith where the water has come up, and they said it was still business as usual earlier on, and they said it's part and parcel for them of trading and working so close to the River Ouse. It is known for flooding when we get heavy rain. There are barriers in place. The Foss barrier, the Environment Agency say, has been put up, and flood alerts in place. People have been told to have a flood plan if necessary, but that heavy rain has stopped. And in tomorrow, instead of wearing your umbrella or having a coat on, we're set for a cold snap.
Well, Anna Riley, thank you so much for bringing us that, and I hope that you haven't got too wet yourself. I hope those wellies are holding tight there in Yorkshire.
Yes, we did mention the scenes in Florida as well a little bit earlier. Here we go. Here's the latest pictures from what is devastation in Florida in some cases. Ron DeSantis confirmed that one person has already died as a result of this particular storm, Helene. As you can see, water just spilling out everywhere. Huge winds.
Spilling over the flood defences there. It's, yeah, pretty tough stuff there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's hope everyone's listened to the evacuation orders there, and that casualties can be kept to a minimum.
Well, yeah, it's a tropical Category 4 storm, so very powerful indeed. Let's hope most people have managed to get to safety, as Tom says. But there's the pictures there that you can see from Florida.
Well, this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. Lots more coming up on today's programme.
Yes, Dame Maggie Smith has died at the age of 89. We'll have more on that as tributes pour in after Tatiana with the news.
Yes, indeed, that's breaking news that Oscar-winning actress Dame Maggie Smith, best known for the Harry Potter films and Downton Abbey, has died at the age of 89. Her family released a statement saying she passed away peacefully in the early hours of this morning. She leaves 2 sons and 5 loving grandchildren behind who are devastated by that loss of their extraordinary mother and grandmother. To another top story today, Britain's youngest knife murderers, who were aged 12 when they killed Sean Cissahey with a machete, have both been sentenced to life with a minimum term of 8.5 years. The killers were convicted in June of murdering the 19-year-old who was stabbed in the heart and suffered a fractured skull in November last year in Wolverhampton. They're the youngest convicted murderers in the UK since Jamie Bulger's killers Robert Thompson and John Venables back in 1993. Barristers representing alleged victims of Mohammed Al-Fayed say there are now 60 survivors and they have credible evidence of abuse at Fulham Football Club. The former Harrods and Fulham FC owners accused of multiple sexual assaults after a BBC investigation published last week. A spokesman for Justice for Harrods survivors, a group of barristers representing the alleged victims, says there's been an enormous response to the investigation. The statement also said there are more to come. And 2 Just Stop Oil activists have been jailed for pouring soup over a Vincent van Gogh sunflowers at London's National Gallery in 2022. 23-year-old Phoebe Plummer and 22-year-old Anna Holland have been jailed for 2 years and 20 months, respectively. Now, they threw 2 tins of Heinz tomato soup over the 1888 work, which is covered by glass, before kneeling down in front of the painting and gluing their hands to the wall beneath it. And those are the latest GB News headlines for now. There's more in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Time for your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. After some very heavy rain in the south this week, it looks a lot drier for most places out there today. Pretty chilly in a brisk breeze with some sunny spells and a few showers. This low pressure brought all the heavy rain yesterday and last night, still across the far southeast this morning, but it's pulling away and allowing the winds to come down from the north. Quite a brisk wind blowing along these North Sea coasts, bringing a real chill and a few scattered showers. Showers across northern Scotland, 1 or 2 dotted around elsewhere, particularly in West Wales. But for most it'll be dry and bright with some spells of sunshine, certainly a lot drier than it has been across the Midlands. It is pretty chilly though, temperatures struggling, only 14, 15 at the very best, and parts of the north struggling to get into double figures. Feeling colder when you add that wind on, which will be particularly lively along the east coast and across parts of northeast Scotland, where it continues to blow the showers in here, and temperatures will drop away fairly sharply this evening too. Showers will keep going across Northern Ireland, and some will feed down through the Irish Sea into North Wales and along the west coast of Wales. But for much of England and Wales, it'll be a dry evening, leading to a dry night and a clear night. And with those clear skies and as the winds start to ease, it is going to turn pretty cold overnight. Some pockets of frost are possible, certainly across northern England and southern Scotland. Northern Scotland won't be as cold as last night because here more cloud will arrive, bringing some outbreaks of rain. But elsewhere, well down into single digits. The countryside, as I said, likely to be pretty close to freezing. So a chilly start to Saturday for sure, but quite a fine start for the bulk of England and Wales, dry and sunny. Quite a lot of cloud for Scotland. There'll be some showery rain drifting through the central belt. We'll keep some showers going through the day across western and northern Scotland. Not much getting to eastern Scotland. And so we'll continue with sunny spells over parts of the Midlands, East Anglia and the southeast. The wind's not as strong tomorrow, but again, it will be on the chilly side.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, I'm Jules Buckley. Queues are on Carlisle, southbound M6, 2 lanes shut. Junction 43 to 42 heavy. Back to 44, there's been an accident. A vehicle having a tyre change causing queues, southbound M18 this one. A lane shut west Maud 4, heading south towards 3 at St Catherine's. Southbound M5 around Gloucester slow near to 11A. A lane shut for emergency repairs is queuing. Back to junction 11. M25, firstly clockwise at Heathrow, junction 14. 2 lanes shut for emergency repairs. The queue is back to Staines 13. Anti-clock Waltham Abbey 26 to Enfield 25 is blocked. Long queues back towards the Bell Common Tunnel. A 2-car bump there. And in Kent, the westbound M26 before junction 5, the M25 and the roadworks lane 1's combed off. There's been a collision, looking very slow.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Good afternoon, Britain. It is 20 to 3. Now, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is set to address the UN General Assembly shortly as conflict in the Middle East continues to escalate.
Yes, we're now looking at live pictures in New York. We're waiting for Benjamin Netanyahu to address the United Nations. In the studio is Mark White with us, our Home and Security Editor. Mark?
Well, Benjamin Netanyahu is third up in terms of world leaders who will be speaking. Remember, of course, last night it was the turn of our very own Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, to make his speech. Now, these speeches are normally 15 minutes or so. So this one has just ended. And I think clearly we've probably got another one. The trouble is with these speeches, although they're supposed to be 15 minutes...
When you're the leader of a country, you seem to think time limits don't apply to you.
I'd hate to use the term windbag, but clearly world leaders feel that there are important issues that they want to impart to the world from whichever particular country and perspective they are speaking
I've always wondered if there's a sort of hierarchy here. If you're the Prime Minister or President of a country with a pretty low GDP, do you sort of get less time than one of the permanent 5 members of the Security Council?
Oh, sorry.
Supposedly not. I think that's not Benjamin Netanyahu, is it?
Oh, I think it might be. It's a little bit too far away from my eyes, but let's just listen in and see if this might be the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu beginning his speech.
Order, please.
Not a lot of consternation in the hall there.
I think that tells you it is Benjamin Netanyahu.
There was whooping, but perhaps was booing as well. Of course, the United Nations has passed many resolutions against the state of Israel.
It is.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, I didn't intend to come here this year. My country is at war, fighting for its life. But after I heard the lies and slanders leveled at my country by many of the speakers at this podium, I decided to come here and set the record straight. I decided to come here to speak for my people, to speak for my country, to speak for the truth. And here's the truth. Israel seeks peace. Israel yearns for peace. Israel has made peace and will make peace again. Yet we face savage enemies who seek our annihilation, and we must defend ourselves against these savage murderers. Our enemies seek not only to destroy us, they seek to destroy our common civilization and return all of us to a dark age of tyranny and terror. When I spoke here last year, I said we faced the same timeless choice that Moses put before the people of Israel thousands of years ago. As we were about to enter the Promised Land, Moses told us that our actions will determine whether we bequeath to future generations a blessing or a curse. And that is the choice we face today. The curse of Iran's unremitting aggression, or the blessing of a historic reconciliation between Arab and Jew. In the days that followed that speech, the blessing I spoke of came into sharper focus. A normalization deal between Saudi Arabia and Israel seemed closer than ever. But then came the curse of October 7th. Thousands of Iranian-backed Hamas terrorists from Gaza burst into Israel in pickup trucks, on motorcycles, and they committed unimaginable atrocities. They savagely murdered 1,200 people. They raped and mutilated women. They beheaded men. They burned babies alive. They burnt entire families alive, babies, children, parents, grandparents, in scenes reminiscent of the Nazi Holocaust. Hamas kidnapped 251 people from dozens of different countries, dragging them into the dungeons of Gaza. Israel has brought home 154 of these hostages, including 117 who returned alive. I want to assure you, we will not rest until the remaining hostages are brought home too. And some of their family members are here with us today. I ask you to stand up. With us is Eli Stevie, whose son Idan was abducted from the Nova Music Festival. That was his crime, a music festival. And these murderous monsters took him. Kobe Smirno, whose son Jonathan was murdered, and his corpse was taken into the dungeons, into the terror tunnels of Gaza, a corpse held hostage. Salim al-Atrash, whose brother Muhammad, a brave Arab-Israeli soldier, was murdered. His body too was taken to Gaza. And so was the body of Ifat Hyman's daughter in Bar, who was brutally murdered at that same music festival. With us is Sharon Sharabi, whose brother Yossi was murdered, and who prays for his older brother Eli, who is still held hostage in Gaza. And with us too is Izhar Liftich from Kibbutz Nir Oz, a kibbutz that was wiped out by the terrorists. Thankfully, we achieved the release of his mother Yocheved, but his father Oded is still languishing in an underground terrorist hell of Hamas. I again promise you, we will return your loved ones home. We will not spare that effort until this holy mission is accomplished. Ladies and gentlemen, the curse of October 7th began when Hamas invaded Israel from Gaza, but it didn't end there. Israel was soon forced to defend itself on 6 more war fronts organized by Iran. On October 8th, Hezbollah attacked us from Lebanon. Since then, they fired over 8,000 rockets at our towns and cities, at our civilians, at our children. 2 weeks later, the Iran-backed Houthis in Yemen launched drones and missiles at Israel, the first of 250 such attacks, including one yesterday aimed at Tel Aviv. Iran's Shiite militias in Syria and Iraq have targeted Israel dozens of times over the past year as well. Fueled by Iran, Palestinian terrorists in Judea and Samaria perpetrated scores of attacks there and throughout Israel. And last April, for the first time ever, Iran directly attacked Israel from its own territory, firing 300 drones, cruise missiles, and ballistic missiles at us. I have a message for the tyrants of Tehran. If you strike us, we will strike you. There is no place in Iran that the long arm of Israel cannot reach, and that's true of the entire Middle East. Far from being lambs led to the slaughter, Israel's soldiers have fought back with incredible courage and with heroic sacrifice. And I have another message for this assembly and for the world outside this hall. We are winning. Ladies and gentlemen, as Israel defends itself against Iran in the 7-front war, The line separating the blessing and the curse could not be more clear. This is the map I presented here last year. It's a map of a blessing. It shows Israel and its Arab partners forming a land bridge connecting Asia and Europe between the Indian Ocean and the Mediterranean Sea. Across this bridge, we will lay rail lines, energy pipelines, fiber optic cables, and this will serve the betterment of 2 billion people. Now look at this second map. It's a map. Look at the second map. It's a map of a curse. It's a map of an arc of terror that Iran has created and imposed from the Indian Ocean to the Mediterranean. Iran's malignant arc has shut down international waterways. It cuts off trade. It destroys millions, destroys nations from within, and inflicts misery on millions. On the one hand, a bright blessing, a future of hope. On the other hand, a dark future of despair. And if you think this dark map is only a curse for Israel, if you think that, then you should think again. Because Iran's aggression, if it's not checked, will endanger every single country in the Middle East and many, many countries in the rest of the world. Because Iran seeks to impose its radicalism well beyond the Middle East. That's why it funds terror networks on 5 continents. That's why it builds ballistic missiles for nuclear warheads to threaten the entire world. For too long, the world has appeased Iran. It turns a blind eye to its internal repression. It turns a blind eye to its external aggression. Well, that appeasement must end. And that appeasement must end now. Nations of the world should support the brave people of Iran who want to rid themselves of this evil regime. Responsible governments should not only support Israel in rolling back Iran's aggression, they should join Israel. They should join Israel in stopping Iran's nuclear weapons program. In this body, in the Security Council, we're going to have a deliberation in a few months. And I call on the Security Council to snap back UN Security Council sanctions against Iran, because we must all do everything in our power to ensure that Iran never gets nuclear weapons. For decades, I've been warning the world against Iran's nuclear program. Our actions delayed this program by perhaps a decade, but we haven't stopped it. We've delayed it, but we haven't stopped it. Iran now seeks to weaponize its nuclear program for the sake of the peace and security of all your countries. For the sake of the peace and security of the entire world, we must not let that happen. And I assure you, Israel will do everything in its power to make sure it doesn't happen. So, ladies and gentlemen, the question before us is simple. Which of these 2 maps that I showed you will shape our future? Will it be the blessings of peace and prosperity for Israel, our Arab partners, and the rest of the world? Or will it be the curse in which Iran and its proxies spread carnage and chaos everywhere? Israel has already made its choice. We've decided to advance the blessing. We're building a partnership for peace with our Arab neighbors while fighting the forces of terror that threaten that peace. For nearly a year, the brave men and women of the IDF have been systematically crushing Hamas's terror army that once ruled Gaza. On October 7th, the day of that invasion into Israel, that terror army numbered nearly 40,000 terrorists. It was armed with more than 15,000 rockets. It had 350 miles of terror tunnels, an underground network bigger than the New York subway system, which they used to wreak havoc above and below ground. A year later, the IDF has killed or captured more than half of these terrorists, destroyed over 90% of their rocket arsenal, and eliminated the key segments of their terror tunnel network. In major military operations, we destroyed nearly all of Hamas's terror battalions, 23 out of 24 battalions. Now, to complete our victory, we are focused on mopping up Hamas's remaining fighting capabilities. We are taking out senior terrorist commanders and destroying remaining terrorist infrastructure. But all the while, and I'll say this one more time, we remain focused on our sacred mission, bringing our hostages home, and we will not stop until that mission is complete. Now, ladies and gentlemen, even with Hamas's greatly diminished military capability, the terrorists still exercise some governing power in Gaza by stealing the food that we enable aid agencies to bring into Gaza. Hamas steals the food, and then they hike the prices. They feed their bellies, and then they fill their coffers with money that they extort from their own people. They sell the stolen food at exorbitant prices, and that's how they stay in power. Well, this too has to end, and we're working to bring it to an end. And the reason is simple. Because if Hamas stays in power, it will regroup, rearm, and attack Israel again and again and again, as it is vowed to do. So Hamas has got to go. Just imagine, for those who say, well, Hamas has to stay, it has to be part of a post-war Gaza, imagine in a post-war situation in World War II, imagine allowing the defeated Nazis in 1945 to rebuild Germany. It's inconceivable, it's ridiculous. It didn't happen then, it's not going to happen now. This is why Israel will reject any rule for Hamas in a post-war Gaza. We don't seek to resettle Gaza. What we seek is a demilitarized and de-radicalized Gaza. Only then can we ensure that this round of fighting will be the last round of fighting. We are ready to work with regional and other partners to support a local civilian administration in Gaza committed to peaceful coexistence. As for the hostages, I have a message for the Hamas captors. Let them go. Let them go, all of them. Those alive today must be returned alive, and the remains of those whom you brutally killed must be returned to their families. Those families here with us today, and others in Israel, deserve to have a resting place for their loved ones, a place where they can grieve and remember them. This war, ladies and gentlemen, this war can come to an end now. All that has to happen is for Hamas to surrender, lay down its arms, and release all the hostages. But if they don't, we will fight until we achieve victory, total victory. There is no substitute for it. Israel must also defeat Hezbollah in Lebanon. Hezbollah is the quintessential terror organization in the world today. It has tentacles that span in all continents. It has murdered more Americans and more Frenchmen than any group except bin Laden. It's murdered the citizens of many countries represented in this room, and it has attacked Israel viciously over the last 20 years, in the last year, completely unprovoked. A day after the Hamas massacre, on October 7th, Hezbollah began attacks against Israel, which forced more than 60,000 Israelis on our northern border to leave their homes, becoming refugees in their own land. Hezbollah turned vibrant towns in the north of Israel into ghost towns. So I want you to think about this in equivalent American terms. Just imagine if terrorists turned El Paso and San Diego into ghost towns. Then ask yourself, how long would the American government tolerate that? A day? A week? A month? I doubt they tolerate it even for a single day. Yet Israel has been tolerating this intolerable situation for nearly a year. Well, I've come here today to say enough is enough. We won't rest until our citizens can return safely to their homes. We will not accept a terror army perched on our northern border, able to perpetrate another October 7th style massacre. For 18 years, Hezbollah brazenly refused to implement UN Security Council Resolution 1701, which requires it to move its forces away from our borders. Instead, Hezbollah moved right up to our border. They secretly dug terror tunnels to infiltrate our communities and indiscriminately fired thousands of rockets into our towns and villages. They fire these rockets and missiles not from military sites, not from that. They do that too. But they fire those rockets and missiles after they place them in schools, in hospitals, in apartment buildings, and in the private homes of the citizens of Lebanon. They endanger their own people. They put a missile in every kitchen, a rocket in every garage. I said to the people of Lebanon this week, get out of the death trap that Hezbollah has put you in. Don't let Nasrallah drag Lebanon into the abyss. We're not at war with you. We're at war with Hezbollah, which has hijacked your country and threatens to destroy ours. As long as Hezbollah chooses the path of war, Israel has no choice, and Israel has every right to remove this threat and return our citizens to their homes safely. And that's exactly what we're doing. Just this week, the IDF destroyed large percentages of Hezbollah's rockets, which it built with Iran's funding for 3 decades. We took out senior military commanders who not only shed Israeli blood, but American and French blood as well. And then we took out their replacements, and then the replacements of their replacements. And we'll continue degrading Hezbollah until all our objectives are met. Ladies and gentlemen, we're committed to removing the curse of terrorism that threatens all civilized societies. But to truly realize the blessing of a new Middle East, we must continue the path we paved with the Abraham Accords 4 years ago. Above all, this means achieving a historic peace agreement between Israel and Saudi Arabia. And having seen the blessings that we've already brought with the Abraham Accords, the millions of Israelis who've already flown back and forth across the Arabian Peninsula, over the skies of Saudi Arabia, to the Gulf countries, the trade, the tourism, the joint ventures, the peace, I say to you, what blessings such a peace with Saudi Arabia would bring. It would be a boon to the security and economy of our two countries. It would boost trade and tourism across the region. It would help transform the Middle East into a global juggernaut. Our two countries could cooperate on energy, water, agriculture, artificial intelligence, and many, many other fields. Such a peace, I'm sure, would be a true pivot of history. It would usher in a historic reconciliation between the Arab world and Israel, between Islam and Judaism, between Mecca and Jerusalem. While Israel is committed to achieving such a peace, Iran and its terror proxies are committed to scuttling it. That's why one of the best ways to foil Iran's nefarious designs is to achieve the peace. Such a peace would be the foundation for an even broader Abrahamic alliance, and that alliance would include the United States, Israel's current Arab peace partners, Saudi Arabia, and others who choose the blessing of peace. It would advance security and prosperity across the Middle East and bring enormous benefits to the rest of the world. With American support and leadership, I believe this vision can materialize, and much sooner than people think. And as the Prime Minister of Israel, I will do everything in my power to make it happen. This is an opportunity that we and the world should not let go by. Ladies and gentlemen, Israel has made its choice. We seek to move forward to a bright age of prosperity and peace. Iran and its proxies have also made their choice. They want to move back to a dark age of terror and war. And now I have a question, and I pose that question to you. What choice will you make? Will your nation
Welcome
stand
to the
with
Martin
Israel?
Dorman Show on Friday afternoon. You join us here on the tail end of the Benjamin Netanyahu, that's the Israeli Prime Minister, addressing the United Nations. You can see there some empty seats, including Saudi Arabia and some of the states, shall I say, not too sympathetic towards Israel in this conflict. A quick summary of what Benjamin Netanyahu was saying there. He said Israel is fighting for its life. He said this war can come to an end now. All that has to happen is for Hamas to surrender, to lay down its arms and to release all